Tonight, we're leaving the safety of the city lights and heading straight into the loneliest stretches of Texas, where the backroads twist for miles and secrets hide in the dark. From strange figures lurking in roadside, ditches to headlights that appear out of nowhere and never pass, get ready for 20 disturbing true stories from Texas Backroads that will make you think twice before taking the long way home. But before we begin, here's something most viewers don't realize. Almost 90% of people watch these stories without subscribing, and by doing that, they miss out on the darkest, most bone-chilling tales from the heart of Texas and beyond. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's ride down these roads is only the beginning, and what waits out there in the shadows isn't going to let you go so easily. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments, because out here, the night never really ends, and the horror is always closer than you think. Now, buckle up, let's drive into the darkness. I had been driving back roads for years, long enough to know which routes were quicker, which ones were rough on the suspension, and which stretches you didn't want to be caught on after dark. That night, though, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I had stayed too late at a buddy's place in Waco, drinking cheap beer and catching up on old times, and I wanted to take the county roads back toward Mexia rather than hit the interstate. They cut the drive in half if you knew where you were going. The night was damp and still, one of those muggy Texas evenings where the air itself feels heavy. The pine and oak trees along the road looked darker than they should have, their branches knitted overhead like they were trying to block out the moon. My high beams stretched only so far before the shadows swallowed everything again. The only sound was the hum of my tires on cracked asphalt and the low whistle of wind sneaking through the old seals on my truck's windows. Came up on a stretch of County Road 435 that locals called Dead Man's Ditch. I'd heard the nickname before but never gave it much thought. Out here, every winding road had some story to it. This one had a ditch that cut deep on either side, carved years back by flooding. The asphalt hugged it close, like the road itself might slip off the edge if the rains came again. That's when I saw him. At first it barely registered, just a darker shape within the dark. Then the beams of my headlights caught him, standing knee-deep in the ditch, motionless. A tall figure, thin but not frail, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. He didn't step back or wave me down. He just stared. I couldn't make out his face, but I felt it on me as I passed. That heavy weight of eyes watching. I slowed almost without thinking, glanced in the mirror. He hadn't moved, just stood there half buried in shadow, head slightly tilted as if curious. My gut tightened. There was no reason for anyone to be standing in a ditch out here, not at midnight, not miles from the nearest farmhouse. I told myself it was nothing. Probably some drunk who had wandered off, maybe a ranch hand heading back from a long shift. But as I drove on, the image clung to me. The way he was standing, too still, too deliberate, like he had been waiting there. 5 miles later, my radio fuzzed to static. I smacked the dashboard, trying to bring back the country station I'd been half listening to. Through the static, I thought I heard something. A faint rhythm, like a voice trying to push through. I turned the knob, but no matter the station, it was the same. Static with a low, almost human sound buried in it. I glanced back at the road. My headlights caught another bend, another stretch of ditch running alongside. And there he was again, the same man, the same stance. Knee-deep in the ditch, head cocked, watching. I gripped the wheel tighter, breath catching in my throat. It wasn't possible. There was no side road, no shortcut he could have taken to get here before me. Not unless he had been running full speed through brush and barbed wire. And even then, it didn't make sense. He looked as if he hadn't moved at all, like I just looped back to the same spot without realizing. I pressed harder on the gas. The truck shuddered as the speedometer climbed. My pulse kept pace with it, thumping so loud in my ears it nearly drowned out the static. I didn't look in the mirrors this time. I kept my eyes locked on the stretch of road ahead, but the feeling wouldn't leave me. The certainty that if I did glance back, I'd see him standing closer than before, staring from the ditch. The miles blurred, The ditches kept appearing, one after another, deep gouges in the earth. My high beams lit them up in sharp bursts, then darkness again. At least half a dozen times I thought I saw movement in them, something tall shifting just out of reach of the light. Finally, I told myself I was being stupid. I pulled the truck over at a wide patch where the ditch had flattened out. I killed the engine, leaving only the tick of cooling metal and the night pressing in. The silence was heavier than before, like even the crickets had gone still. I opened the door, the gravel crunching under my boots. I held my flashlight tight, sweeping it across the ditch. Nothing. Just damp grass, twisted roots, and the murky bottom where water sometimes pooled after storms. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to steady my nerves. That's when the beam of my light caught something pale against the mud. A handprint, long fingers pressed deep into the wet soil, as if someone had braced themselves there. I shined further. Another print and another climbing up the side of the ditch. I staggered back, my chest tightening. The prints led straight to the spot where I had seen him. And there, faint but unmistakable in the mud, were the impressions of bare feet, pointed toward the road. Toward me. I scrambled back into the truck, fired the engine, and peeled off, gravel spitting behind me. My hands trembled so bad on the wheel I could barely keep straight. Every bend in the road felt like a trap, every stretch of ditch a place where he could be waiting. When I finally reached Mexia, the town lights never looked so good. I didn't stop until I was in my driveway, doors locked, headlights flooding my garage. I sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was over. But when I finally forced myself to step out, I saw it. On the side of my truck, smeared across the dusty paint, were streaks of mud, not splashed by the road, but hand-shaped, sliding down the door like someone had dragged their fingers across it while I drove. And in the faint glow of my porch light, I swear the marks were still wet. Highway 59 runs long and straight across the black heart of East Texas, a river of asphalt lit by the occasional lonely gas station or the sodium lamps above a rest stop. I had been driving it for years, making the run from Livingston down toward Lufkin, the hum of the tires and the monotonous roll of pine trees so familiar I could picture them with my eyes closed. That night, though, there was something different in the air. It was sticky, heavy, like the humidity had weight, and even though the dash thermometer read a comfortable 74, I kept feeling like sweat was pooling under my shirt. I remember checking the clock on the radio, 12:03 a.m. The highway was mine alone, or so it seemed, until I caught the glow in my rear view. It wasn't the pale swing of headlights from a sedan or the squinting beams of a pickup. This was something larger, brighter, like a floodlight sweeping the lanes. The hum reached me before the shape did, the roar of a diesel engine laboring uphill where there was no hill. When it passed, the thing was massive, a semi with chrome so polished it reflected the moonlight like glass. Its cab glowed faintly, an otherworldly white, and its trailer stretched impossibly long, longer than any rig I'd ever seen, but there was no lettering, no company name, nothing but blank shining metal. I leaned forward on the wheel, squinting at it because I'd swear I could see right through parts of it, like heat mirage over pavement. And then the strangest part, its headlights didn't throw light on the asphalt. They burned, but they didn't illuminate. The driver never glanced at me, never gave the casual wave truckers sometimes do. The cab windows were black, almost liquid, and though I slowed to match its pace, the semi surged forward with a growl, its glow intensifying until I had to shield my eyes. It rounded the next bend, a curve I knew well that skirted a wall of pines near a culvert bridge. And when I followed seconds later, the highway was empty. Nothing in front of me but two faded lanes vanishing into dark woods. No taillights, no engine hum fading down the line, no trace of tire spray on the asphalt. Gone like it had never been. I pulled off at the shoulder, heart pounding, and sat there listening to the insects buzzing in the trees. For a long minute, I convinced myself I had imagined it, that fatigue had conjured the thing out of shadows and moonlight. But when I opened my door and stepped out. The smell of diesel hit me sharp and acrid, heavy as if I were standing right behind a running engine. I crouched and laid my hand on the road. The asphalt was hot to the touch, far hotter than it should have been at midnight. My headlights caught a faint smear along the pavement, not quite oil, not quite water, shimmering with a silvery sheen. When I blinked, it was gone. That was the first night. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe it? But Highway 59 has a long memory, and sometimes it doesn't let things go so easy. 2 weeks later, I drove the same stretch, same time of night, and just after midnight, the glow returned. This time I kept my speed, refused to slow down. The semi howled past, wind rocking my car like a storm front had rolled through, and I gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. Again it vanished at that same bend. And again when I passed, the road was clear. But that night I wasn't alone. A battered pickup had been ahead of me, an old Chevy with a bed full of tools that were kind of rig a working man would drive. I saw the truck pulled half into the ditch, hazard lights blinking. I slowed, thinking maybe he'd blown a tire. Then I saw the driver standing in the beam of my headlights, arms stiff at his sides, staring down the road. His face was pale, slack, and he shook his head once when I rolled down my window. I asked if he was all right, if he needed a lift, but he just whispered, "It wasn't there." Then he climbed back into his truck, killed the hazards, and drove off without another word. I thought about that for days. I thought about how his eyes had looked, glassy like he'd seen something he didn't have words for, and I realized it wasn't just me. Whatever was riding Highway 59, others had seen it too. After that, I started digging. Old-timers in Livingston, the kind who sit outside the diner with coffee mugs that never empty, they told stories. They said back in the 60s, a freight semi went off that very stretch of road, jackknifed on a curve slick with rain, the trailer smashing through the guardrail into the pines. The driver had been hauling for a company out of Houston, but the records were strange. The bills of lading half filled, the cargo never specified. Folks said the wreck burned for 3 days, fire crews pouring water until the embers hissed like snakes. When they pulled what was left from the cab, there was no body, no bones, just ash packed in the seat like someone had been erased. The company disappeared after that, shut its doors overnight. Some said the semi was cursed. Others said it had never been built to run in this world at all. Since then, people have whispered. A glowing rig on 59, midnight runs where headlights blind and engines scream. But there's never anything there when you follow. Some call it a ghost truck. Some swear it's a warning. A few, the real quiet ones, say if you follow it too far, if you keep pace when it rounds that bend, you don't come back. I never chased it again. That night with the man in the pickup was enough. Still, every time I drive Highway 59 past Livingston, I catch myself staring at the curve, waiting for the flood of light, the roar of a diesel that no longer belongs to any map or motor. And sometimes, even when the road is empty, I smell the sting of diesel through my vents. Sometimes my headlights catch a shimmer on the asphalt, a silver streak that vanishes when I blink. Sometimes I think about the driver who burned to ash, and I wonder if he's still out there, running endless miles down a road that won't let him stop. And sometimes I hear it, faint over the hum of my own engine, a deep, rhythmic growl like thunder rolling across the pines. Always after midnight, always at that bend, always just ahead, just out of reach, a vanishing semi roaring down Highway 59, and I know one night I won't be able to stop myself from following. On County Road 19, you learn quick to keep your eyes forward and your windows up. Folks around Lavaca and Gonzales whisper about it, but they don't talk too long. I heard the story myself one hot June night, when I had no choice but to take that back road through the mesquite scrub. I was driving home from a late shift, bleary-eyed, half-running on cold gas station coffee, the road stretching in front of me like some dark ribbon laid across the dirt fields. The air was thick with that Texas humidity, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back even with the AC blasting. Cicadas screamed from the brush, and every once in a while a jackrabbit darted across the gravel shoulder. It was lonely out there, the kind of lonely that feels bigger than it should, like the world shrank down to just you and your headlights. It was a little after midnight when I first heard it. At first I thought it was the radio, maybe some ad, cutting in weird. But then I killed the volume and realized it was coming from outside. A baby crying. Soft at first, then sharper, like it was right there in the mesquite. I slowed, squinting at the scrub on the roadside, but I couldn't see anything. Just tangled branches, thorny and pale under the high beams. The cry came again, thin and high-pitched, and my gut tightened. I pulled over against my better judgment, the gravel crunching under my tires, and rolled the window down halfway. The sound cut straight into me. Anyone who's ever heard a baby cry knows it flips something inside you. You want to help no matter what. That's what it felt like. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, got out, and stood there with the heat pressing against my face. The night smelled of dust and mesquite sap, and the moon was just a sliver over the horizon. The crying seemed to drift between the brush, just out of reach, as if something moved it farther each time I stepped toward it. I called out, "Hello, anybody there? You need help?" My voice sounded small. Nothing answered but the crying, and even that seemed to slide around, first to my left, then further ahead. The hairs on my arms lifted. Every instinct told me not to go in there. Coyotes, snakes, hogs, it wasn't safe. But the thought of a baby abandoned in that brush gnawed at me. I took a few steps closer, sweeping the beam through the branches, catching glimpses of pale bark and shadows that looked like faces until I blinked them away. The sound stopped all at once. Dead silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. And then, faintly behind me, it started again. I froze. It wasn't coming from the brush anymore. It was coming from the road. From the car. My heart hammered as I turned slowly, the light jittering in my hand. The crying was muffled now, as if coming through metal. It was coming from my trunk. I don't remember opening the door or even walking back. One moment I was staring at the mesquite. The next I was standing at the back of my car, my hand shaking on the latch. I didn't want to open it. Every part of me screamed not to. But the sound was so real, so sharp, I had to know. I pulled the latch and the trunk popped open with a metallic click. The crying cut off instantly. Nothing inside but my spare tire, jumper cables, a greasy rag. No baby. No sound. Just the night pressing in on me. I slammed the trunk shut, climbed in the driver's seat, and peeled off so fast gravel spit behind me. My hands were slick on the wheel, and I didn't let off the gas until I hit the lights of Highway 183. I thought maybe exhaustion had played tricks on me, that the loneliness of those miles had gnawed at my brain. But here's the thing. When I got home and parked, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Tiny smudges on the bumper like prints. Small, smeared, no bigger than a child's hand, pressed into the dust. I tried to wipe them off with the rag from my trunk, but they didn't come away. It took days of rain before they faded. And even then, when I drove past that same stretch again, I kept my windows up and the radio loud, though I swore I could hear faint crying under the music. Later, I asked around. Old-timers in town said it wasn't the first time. Folks traveling County Road 19 had heard the baby too. Some stopped, some didn't. The ones who stopped always said the same thing. The crying moved from the brush to their car to their trunk. And some never came back at all, just vanished along that lonely strip of road. Sheriff's deputies chalked it up to drifters, bad weather, drunks running off into the scrub. But people in town knew better. They said, years back, a young mother and her baby broke down out there one summer night. Nobody found them till morning. The mother dead from heat, the baby never found. Since then, travelers hear it. The crying that shifts, luring you out, then turning on you. They say if you open the trunk and there's nothing inside, you're safe. This time. But if you ever hear the cry from the back seat, you'll never make it home. Every time I think back to that night, I can still hear it, sharp as broken glass, cutting through the hot Texas dark. That baby wailing where no baby should be. And I swear when I drive alone now, sometimes I catch it faintly under the hum of the tires like it's waiting for me to stop again. Bastrop Road is the kind of stretch of Texas blacktop that feels older than the trees hemming it in on both sides. I've driven it more times than I can count, usually late at night coming back from Austin, when the radio fuzzes out halfway through a song and the piney woods seem to lean in, heavy with their own kind of silence. People around here talk about deer crossings, about drunks swerving out of Smithville, about the danger of hitting a hog at 65. But what they don't talk about, not unless they've seen it, is the dog. Not a regular dog, not even a wolf. Something bigger, heavier, darker. A black dog that doesn't follow the rules of this world, the kind that crawls under your skin and sets its claws deep once you've laid eyes on it. I saw it for the first time in the fall of 2017, and nothing's felt safe since. That night the road was damp from a drizzle that had passed an hour before, the kind that leaves the air cool but heavy, clinging to the windshield no matter how high you crank the defroster. I was alone, heading back from visiting a buddy who lived out near Elgin. My high beams cut tunnels through the dark, and the smell of wet pine seeped in through a crack in the window. I remember reaching down to twist the dial on the radio, some faint Tejano station bleeding through static, when my headlights caught something moving. At first I thought it was a hog, maybe a big one, judging by the low, fast shadow darting across the asphalt. But when it broke into the light, I knew it wasn't. It was a dog, or shaped like one, huge, black as tar, shoulders nearly brushing the hood of my car as it bolted across the road. Its eyes glowed like coals, and its body wasn't quite solid, like smoke-given bones. My stomach dropped. I hit the brakes hard enough that the tires screamed, and I swore I felt the whole car jolt sideways. The dog vanished into the trees, swallowed by the dark, and I sat there gripping the wheel, my heart banging so loud it filled the silence. I waited, staring at the brush where it had gone, half expecting it to circle back. Nothing moved, not even the wind. Finally, I cursed under my breath, shoved the car back into gear and kept driving. My hands were still shaking. 10 minutes later, my headlights swept another bend, and there it was again. Same dog, same black body, same glowing eyes, darting across the road like it had been waiting for me. My jaw locked so tight it hurt. I didn't slam the brakes this time. I just let the car roll, my eyes glued to it. But the moment my beams hit the spot where it should have been, it vanished. No sound of paws on gravel, no crashing into undergrowth. Just gone. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio off, my ears straining against the silence. And when I finally pulled into my driveway outside Bastrop, my shirt was stuck to my back with sweat. That night I barely slept. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw those coals burning through the dark. People think these stories fade if you ignore them. They don't. The next week I drove out to Bastrop Road again, half to prove to myself I hadn't imagined it, half because some part of me already knew I hadn't. The dog showed itself again, same way as before. Always darting across the road, always ahead of me, always reappearing miles later. Never chasing me, never letting me catch it. Just staying ahead, pulling me forward. I started to feel like it was leading me somewhere. Once, I followed it. I don't know why. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe madness. The dog appeared and vanished, and instead of staying on the road, I braked hard and swung into a dirt pull-off. The pines pressed in so thick it felt like a wall, but I killed the engine and stepped out anyway. The night air was cool and wet, and I swear the cicadas had gone silent. My flashlight beam cut across trunks, branches, nothing else, until I caught a shape moving between the trees. The dog stood about 30 yards in, still as a shadow, its eyes burning. For a second I couldn't breathe. Then it turned and slipped deeper, silent as fog. I followed, branches clawing at my jacket, mud sucking at my boots. I don't know how long I went, maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. But the deeper I got, the stranger the woods felt. The smell of wet pine gave way to something sour like old blood. My light picked out shapes on the ground, broken bottles, scraps of fabric, a rusted hubcap half buried in dirt. It felt like stumbling into a place where the world forgot itself. Then, I saw it. A clearing opened ahead wide enough that the moonlight spilled down. The dog stood in the center, tall, silent, its body shuddering like smoke. And scattered around it were bones. Piles of them, yellow and cracked. Some animal, some not. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. That's when I heard something else. A sound low and broken, almost a whimper. It came from the bones. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, branches whipping my face, my lungs burning. The woods seemed longer on the way out, endless, until I stumbled back onto gravel and found my car. I drove blind, barely remembering the turns until the asphalt of Bastrop Road slid under my tires again. I don't drive that stretch after dark anymore. Not if I can help it. But sometimes, even when I avoid it, I see the dog. It doesn't matter if I'm in Austin or San Marcos or halfway down 290. Headlights sweep the dark, and there it is. Always ahead, always crossing, always waiting for me to follow. The worst part isn't the dog itself. It's the feeling it leaves behind, like something opened a door the night I followed it into those woods. A door that won't shut, no matter how far I run. And every time I see those burning eyes, I know it's still leading me back toward that clearing, back toward the bones. And one of these nights I won't have the strength to turn away. The payphone stood alone at the bend of County Road 614, half swallowed by weeds, its booth eaten away by rust and sun-bleached to the color of old bone. Nobody drove that stretch anymore, not unless they were lost or had grown up in the area and remembered when it still connected to something. The asphalt had cracked and splintered, mesquite roots pushing up through the surface like broken veins. You could stand there at midnight and not hear a single engine, just the hum of cicadas, the dry rattle of wind in the grass, and if you lingered long enough, the faint, shrill ring of the payphone that should have been dead years ago. I'd passed it for years without giving it much thought. My father used to warn me about that back road, said people disappeared out there, hitchhikers mostly, and that the sheriff in town had stopped patrolling it because nothing good ever came from answering calls about strange lights or noises. I chalked it up to small-town gossip and the way country folk like to dress up the landscape with superstition. But last summer, when the nights were heavy and swollen with heat, I found myself pulled back toward that stretch of road, almost against my better judgment. I remember the first night clear as day. I was driving home from a late shift at the plant in Henderson, the air thick with the smell of burnt oil and dust, when my headlights washed over that crooked booth. The phone was ringing. Not a random jangle either, it was sharp and rhythmic, each peal cutting through the night like a knife against glass. I slowed, my tires crunching gravel, and rolled to a stop. There was no traffic, no houses for miles, just the phone swaying slightly in the warm breeze, ringing like it had been waiting for me. I told myself I'd be a fool to answer it, but the thing about curiosity is it works on you the same way thirst does. You can ignore it until your throat feels raw. So I got out, gravel shifting under my boots, and stepped into that little booth that smelled of mildew and rust. The handset was cracked, wrapped in electrical tape, but the sound coming through it was clean, high-pitched, insistent. I pressed it to my ear. Hello? There was a pause. Then I heard it. A voice whispering, low and hushed, so faint I thought it might be static. Except it wasn't static. It was my name, drawn out like a secret. Eli. My skin prickled. I jerked the phone away and stared at it, half expecting to see some trick wired inside, but there was nothing. Just corroded screws and a receiver heavy with years. I slammed it back into the cradle and stumbled out, my pulse hammering. The phone stopped ringing the second I let go. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I drove home with the radio up too loud, the road behind me empty, the booth shrinking in my mirror until it was just a speck in the dark. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? Folks in town already thought I was half spooked from working, nights too long. But the sound of that whisper clung to me like the smell of smoke on clothes, and the worst part was the way it said my name, not in anger or malice, but like it knew me, like it had been waiting to speak to me for years. The next time was a week later. I was out late again, cutting down the same back road even though I swore I wouldn't. Sure enough, the phone was ringing. I drove past without slowing, but my eyes kept flicking to the mirror, and when the sound cut out as I rounded the bend, it felt like I'd left a door half open behind me. That night I dreamed of the booth. I dreamed of standing inside while the world outside went black, and the voice on the line grew louder, closer, until it wasn't in the receiver anymore, but breathing against the back of my neck. By the third week, I wasn't even pretending to avoid it. Some nights I went out there deliberately, parking a mile away and walking in under the moonlight, listening to the dry scrape of grass against my jeans, the air full of moths, and the distant bark of coyotes. The booth never failed me. The moment I came within sight, the phone would ring, always the same, always waiting. I started answering, telling myself I'd catch the trick, that some old CB signal or crossed wire was feeding in static. But each time I lifted the receiver, I heard the same whisper, sometimes a single word, sometimes my name stretched long, sometimes a laugh that was little more than air. Once, I swear, it asked me to come closer. I pressed the receiver hard against my ear, and I could hear breathing, shallow and uneven, like someone was standing just out of sight. I began to dread the nights I didn't go. I'd lie in bed and imagine the phone ringing out there in the dark, unanswered, building like pressure in a sealed room. I couldn't escape the thought that if I ignored it too long, it would find another way to reach me. One night in July, thick with storm clouds and distant thunder, I drove out and found the booth darker than usual. The bulb overhead had long since died, but the glow of my headlights caught something wet dripping from the receiver. It looked like condensation at first, but when I touched it, the liquid smeared thick and dark across my fingers. I lifted the phone anyway. This time the voice didn't whisper. It spoke. My name, firm and deliberate, followed by words I'll never forget. I'm here. I dropped the handset, the clatter loud enough to echo down the road, but the voice didn't stop. It spilled from the dangling receiver, softer now, coaxing like it wanted me to lean in. My headlights flickered once, twice, and then cut out completely, leaving me swallowed by the dark. The only light was the faint, unnatural glow from inside the booth. I don't remember running back to my truck. I just remember the slam of the door, the engine roaring, the back tires spitting gravel as I tore away. I didn't look back until I reached town, and even then, I half expected to see the booth standing at the corner of Main Street, phone still ringing. Since that night, I've heard the sound in places I shouldn't. Once in the break room at work, faint under the hum of the vending machine. Once at my mother's house, when I walked past the old rotary phone that hasn't worked in years. And sometimes late at night, lying in bed with the windows open, I'll hear the jangle carried on the wind, steady and sharp, until it fades back into the dark. I don't drive that road anymore, haven't for months. But I know it's still out there waiting. Folks say when things die, they stay dead, but not everything listens to rules. The payphone doesn't care about rules, it just rings. And if you're foolish enough to answer, it doesn't forget your name. The worst part is, last night my cell phone lit up at 3:17 a.m. No number, no caller ID, just the word payphone across the screen. It rang once, twice, 3 times. When I picked it up, there was nothing on the other end but a low breath dragging slow through the speaker, followed by a whisper that didn't need to repeat itself. It was my name, and then it hung up. Now I'm waiting for it to ring again. Highway 59 runs through East Texas like a scar, a strip of gray that cuts across pine forest and sleepy towns where gas stations look like they haven't been updated since the 70s. I used to drive it every Friday night when I was younger, coming back from college in Nacogdoches to see my folks in Lufkin. It's the kind of road that makes you feel small, swallowed by dark woods on either side, the air thick with pine tar and humidity even after midnight. You get stretches where the radio goes dead, no stations coming through, just the whisper of static like someone trying to breathe in your ear. That road has its share of stories. Ask anyone who's lived along it long enough and they'll tell you about the woman in the sundress. I first heard about her from a trucker named Danny. He was at the gas station by Dibble, leaning on his rig, cigarette dangling from his lip. I was filling up my old Ford and he struck up a conversation like he was desperate to talk to someone. He asked if I'd seen her yet. I told him no, figuring he meant some waitress or bartender. He shook his head and his eyes got glassy like he was looking at something over my shoulder. He said she walks barefoot along the shoulder of 59, wearing a yellow sundress, her hair black as tar and long down her back. She looks normal until you get close. Then you realize she doesn't have a face. No nose, no mouth, no eyes, just smooth, skin stretched tight and pale as porcelain. He swore he picked her up once near Shepherd, and when he looked in the mirror, she was sitting in the back seat instead of the passenger side, her head tilted like she was listening, but there was nothing where her face should be. He said he pulled over and she was gone when he opened the door. He told it straight, no grin, no wink, just the story, raw and matter of fact, like a man unburdening himself of something he couldn't shake. I didn't believe him, not at first. East Texas has no shortage of tall tales. Goatman's Bridge, the phantom lights near Saratoga, the screaming woman of Crybaby Creek. Everybody's uncle or cousin swears they've seen something, but the first time I drove back that way after hearing Danny's story, I caught myself watching the tree line. The road seemed darker, the woods deeper, and the smell of wet pine carried something sour underneath, like old flowers left too long, in a vase. I told myself I was being stupid, just primed by a good ghost story, but I slowed down near every shadow and kept my doors locked. It wasn't until the summer of 2006 that I saw her. The night was thick with heat, no breeze moving, cicadas buzzing like a rattling engine. I was heading north just past Corrigan, headlights cutting through the dark, when I spotted movement along the ditch. At first I thought it was a deer, maybe about to jump the fence, but then I saw her, tall, barefoot, walking slow, the hem of her sundress brushing the tops of the weeds. She didn't wave, didn't look up, just kept walking, arms hanging loose like she had no bones in them. I tapped the brakes without thinking. The back of my neck went tight, a feeling like someone had just set a cold hand on me. I leaned forward, trying to see her face. That was the mistake. The closer I got, the clearer it was. Her face wasn't missing so much as erased, just pale skin, flat and smooth like wax, the faintest indentation where a mouth might have been but sealed shut. I couldn't see eyes, but I swear she was staring at me. My gut told me she knew I was looking, that she was feeding on the attention. I floored it, blew past her without daring to glance again. For miles I felt her presence, like she was sitting in the cab with me, quiet, watching. I rolled down the window just to breathe, the hot night air thick with pine needles and road tar. I didn't tell anyone at first. It sounded too much like one of those stories that grows in the telling. But a week later I was back at the same gas station in Diboll, and the old man behind the counter saw me white as a sheet and asked, "You seen her too?" He told me his niece had picked her up one night near Livingston. The niece thought she was just some lost woman, maybe hurt, and offered her a ride. Said she barely had time to unlock the doors before the woman was inside, sitting stiff, sundress, damp with dew. She didn't talk, didn't blink, just turned her head slow as a clock hand. And when the niece reached for the dome light to see better, she realized there was no face. Just smooth, shining skin that caught the glow like glass. She slammed the brakes, turned to scream, and the woman was gone. Vanished like smoke, but the seatbelt was still buckled, and the air smelled like lilies, sickly sweet, clinging to her, clothes for days. The stories pile up if you go looking. Folks swear she's been seen since the 60s, maybe longer. Always the same sundress, always the same road. Some say she died hitchhiking, picked up by the wrong man. Others say she's the ghost of a girl buried in an unmarked grave near the highway. Her face rubbed smooth by time, so now she walks with nothing left. I don't know which to believe, but I know she's real. Too many people have seen her, too many folks carrying the same haunted look when they talk about her. The last time I drove 59 at night, I made the mistake of checking my rear view. Nothing there at first, just the glow of my own taillights against the trees. But then I caught a flicker. A figure in the back seat, pale shoulders, dark hair. My heart locked in my chest, every nerve screaming at me not to turn around. I drove 40 miles like that, eyes fixed on the road, hands cramping on the wheel. When I finally pulled into Lufkin, shaking, she was gone. Seat empty. But the smell of flowers lingered, heavy and wrong, clinging to the upholstery like rot disguised as perfume. I don't drive that stretch anymore after dark. Maybe that makes me superstitious, but I've learned enough to know not to tempt things that don't belong to this world. If you're ever out there, heading north or south between the pines, and you see a woman in a sundress walking the shoulder, don't slow down. Don't look. Don't meet whatever she has in place of eyes. Because once she notices you, once she decides to ride along, she doesn't let go. I was driving late one night on a road I didn't know. The kind of two-lane blacktop that cuts through pine woods so thick you can't see more than a few feet past your headlights. The sky was low, dark, and heavy with that feeling of humidity before a storm, and my radio had faded to static miles back. I should have stopped earlier, but I told myself I'd push on until I saw a town, a gas station, something with light. Out there, you start measuring distance by how long you've been without seeing another set of headlights. It must have been close to an hour when I caught the glow. At first, I thought it was a car parked in the trees, maybe someone broken down. Then I saw it more clearly. A neon vacancy sign, the old kind you used to see on roadside motels in the 70s, glowing red against the trees. Beneath it was a wooden pole sunk deep into the earth, but nothing else. No building, no office, no parking lot. Just the sign itself, flickering faintly and buzzing like a wasp caught in a jar. I slowed and pulled onto the shoulder, gravel popping under my tires. The sign was 20 yards off the road, tucked between two tall loblolly pines. It cast enough of a glow that I could see the bracken grass flattened around it, like something heavy had once stood there. Maybe there had been a motel years ago torn down or burned, and somehow the sign had been left behind with its power still running through. But that didn't make sense. Who would run an electrical line to a sign when the building was gone? I sat with the engine idling and stared, waiting for the trick of it to show itself, the explanation that would make it ordinary. It didn't come. The word vacancy pulsed steady for a moment, then dimmed until the letters were barely legible. They came back with a shudder, glowing brighter than before. I rolled down the window and heard the hum, louder than a normal neon sign should have been. It had that pitch that needles your ears, like a live transformer. Behind it, the woods were darker than the rest of the night, a thick patch that seemed to drink the light. The longer I looked, the more I had the uneasy feeling that if I left my car, I'd see something standing just beyond the tree line waiting. I told myself I was tired. Too many hours on the road. Too much coffee making me jumpy. I almost put the car back in gear, but then I noticed something I couldn't shake. There were faint grooves in the dirt just off the shoulder, old tire ruts leading into the trees, right toward the sign. They weren't fresh, but they were there. The marks of cars turning in as if they were pulling into a lot that no longer existed. And on the edge of those ruts, in the glow of the red letters, I could see something else. Shoe prints, a scattering of them, some half-washed by rain, others sharper, newer. Too many sizes to belong to just one person. Curiosity can feel like a hook in your chest. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of ozone. The buzzing from the sign rattled in my teeth as I moved closer. Its light wasn't steady. It seemed to flare when I took a step forward, dim when I hesitated. I reached the edge of the dirt ruts and crouched. The footprints sank deep, as though whoever had made them had been carrying weight, or maybe reluctant to move forward. Some turned back, but most pointed inward, toward the place where the motel should have been. I told myself I'd only go as far as the pole holding the sign, maybe check if there was a line running underground. When I touched the wood, it was damp and oddly warm, as though blood pulsed beneath the grain. The buzzing deepened. That was when I noticed the ground ahead of me. It wasn't just flattened grass. The space opened wider, a bare patch of dirt, maybe 50 feet across. At the center, the soil looked darker, sunken in like a foundation had been swallowed whole. My skin prickled. The vacancy sign crackled and flared, throwing shadows across the clearing, and in those shadows I thought I saw the angles of a building, the outline of doors and windows. They vanished when I blinked, leaving only the empty dirt. A gust of wind blew through the trees. It carried with it something faint but unmistakable, the smell of stale cigarette smoke, cleaning chemicals, and mildew, the smell of an old motel room. My throat tightened. I turned to go back to the car. That was when I heard it. A door opening. Not behind me, but ahead from the clearing. It was the creak of old hinges followed by the soft slam of wood against a frame. The sign flared so bright it painted everything in harsh red, and in that light I saw them. Shapes moving in the empty space. People. Dozens of them. Their outlines faint, walking between invisible doors, dragging suitcases that scraped against nothing. Their faces were pale smudges, indistinct but turned toward me. I stumbled back, my heel catching a root, nearly sending me to the ground. The figures froze. One of them, taller than the rest, took a step forward. Its movements were jerky, like a film reel missing frames. The buzzing from the sign grew unbearable. My vision swam, and I swear I could hear words threading through the hum, a voice whispering, "Vacancy, vacancy, vacancy." The figure raised its arm and pointed. Behind me, I heard gravel crunch. For a second, I thought maybe another car had stopped, that I wasn't alone. I spun around. My car was there, but the road beyond it was gone. Nothing but trees, dense and endless, stretching in both directions. Panic surged. I bolted for the car, yanking the door open, slamming it shut, fumbling the keys into the ignition. The sign flared once more, bright enough to wash the woods in red. In that light, the clearing wasn't empty anymore. A two-story building stood there, sagging and weathered, its paint peeling, curtains limp and broken windows. A true old roadside motel, alive and rotting. Figures crowded the walkway outside the rooms, their mouths open, but no sound came. The sign hummed so loud I thought my head would split. I jammed the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun, caught, and I shot backward onto the dirt. Trees whipped past on either side. The motel loomed closer in the mirror. I didn't dare look back again. I don't remember how long I drove before the road returned, the asphalt smooth under my wheels, the woods breaking open into farmland. When I finally stopped at a gas station, the clerk asked if I was all right. I must have looked pale, sweating, shaking. He pointed to the neon sign humming in the window, and I flinched. The word vacancy burned in green there, too bright, too steady. I asked him if there'd ever been a motel back down the road, one tucked in the trees. He frowned, shook his head, said there used to be one in the 70s, burned down with a family inside. Nobody built there again. Too many accidents, too many people gone missing. I didn't argue. I paid for gas and coffee, and when I stepped back outside, I kept my eyes on the ground. I didn't want to see if another glow was waiting in the distance. But as I drove away, I couldn't help but notice that faint reflection in the corner of my windshield. Red letters flickering in, the glass keeping pace with me no matter how fast I went. I was 19 the first time I drove that stretch of FM 920 at night. A two-lane ribbon of asphalt that cuts through the dark farmland between Weatherford and Poolville. The road isn't famous for anything other than its loneliness. No gas, stations once you're past the last Dairy Queen, no streetlights except the rare porch lamp in the distance, and nothing to keep you company but the sound of your tires on the blacktop and the wind in the mesquite. Back then, I was just a kid with more curiosity than sense, driving my dad's old Silverado, windows down, radio low, thinking about how grown up it felt to be out there with nothing but night on every side. What I didn't know, what no one really told me until later, was that there was a particular bend on FM 920 where you didn't stop if you valued your peace of mind. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I noticed the road seemed to grow narrower, hemmed in by trees that leaned over it, their branches scratching the dark sky like fingers. My headlights picked up the white glint of a metal cross at the side of the asphalt, one of those roadside memorials with plastic flowers curling in the heat. The air changed there, cooler somehow, damp like I'd driven into a different place altogether. I thought about pulling over to stretch my legs, because I'd been driving a while, and my eyelids felt heavy. Against my better judgment, I braked and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. The truck shuddered, the tires crunching on loose stone, and then I shut off the engine. The silence was thick, too thick. Out in the country you expect crickets, frogs, maybe the distant bark of a dog. But there was nothing. Just the hum in my ears from the sudden absence of noise. I leaned back against the seat listening, and that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of metal dragging across metal. At first I thought it was something shifting in the bed of my truck. Some chain my dad might have left back there. But then it came again, clearer, closer. Chains, rattling and scraping across the roof of the cab. The sound made my scalp prickle. It wasn't random either. It dragged from the hood, across the top, all the way toward the back like someone was pulling them slowly, deliberately. I froze, every muscle tight. I wanted to believe it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or stray dog nosing around. But animals don't drag chains in long, heavy strokes across a truck roof. My hand went to the door handle, but I didn't move. Then it came again, louder this time, like a weight being dragged, clinking links against steel. The roof vibrated with it, and I swear the truck seemed to sink just slightly under the weight, like something had climbed up and was crouching there. My breath came short and quick, fogging the inside of the windshield, though the night was warm. I couldn't bring myself to look up, because some instinct deep inside told me I wouldn't like what I saw through the glass. I did the only thing I could think to do. I turned the key, the Silverado roaring to life, and I stomped the accelerator. Gravel spit out from under the tires, and I swerved back onto the asphalt. As I sped up, the sound didn't fall away like it should have. Instead, it kept pace, the chains clattering along the roof like something was still riding up there, holding on as I hit 60, 70 miles an hour. The steering wheel trembled in my hands, and I prayed under my breath, muttering half-remembered lines of the Lord's Prayer, begging whatever it was to let go. Finally, somewhere near Poolville, it stopped. Just cut off, sudden and clean, as if it had never been there. The truck roof gleamed smooth under the moonlight. No scratches, no dents, nothing out of place. I didn't pull over again that night. I went straight home, parked under the floodlight, and didn't leave the cab until I saw the house door open and my dad waving from the porch. The next day I told my buddy Clay about it, expecting him to laugh, but he didn't. He just nodded and said, "You stopped at the Chains Bend." He explained that locals avoided pulling over there after dark. Stories had been around for years. Whispers about prisoners shackled together, marched down that road when it was nothing but dirt. Supposedly, one night a transport wagon overturned in a storm, and the guards left the chained men to drown in a flooded gully because it was easier than trying to cut them loose. People say the sound of their chains is what you hear if you stop. Too long, like they're dragging themselves across your roof, still trying to get free. Some folks claim if you sit there long enough and don't drive off, you'll see faces at your windows, wet and pale, staring in. I laughed it off with him then, but I didn't laugh inside. I couldn't forget how real it had sounded, how heavy it had felt. Years passed and I stayed away from FM 920 after dark, but sometimes life doesn't let you choose. One evening, after visiting my uncle in Weatherford, I ended up back on that road. A storm had rolled in, rain sheeting the windshield, wipers barely keeping up. The radio went to static and the headlights carved out only a narrow path ahead. I felt the truck shudder as I hit that same stretch. My stomach tightened, and I told myself not to stop no matter what. The rain eased for a moment, and then I saw something that almost made me slam the brakes anyway. In the glow of the headlights, standing right at the edge of the road, were three figures. Not solid, not quite. They looked washed out, like old photographs left in the sun, but I could see the glint of metal around their ankles dragging between them. Chains. Their heads turned as one, and I swear their eyes caught the light, though their faces were half melted in the rain. I gripped the wheel tighter and drove through, heart pounding, refusing to look in the mirrors because I couldn't bear the thought of what might be there. When I finally reached home, soaked to the bone, I left the truck running in the driveway and went inside. My hands shook for hours afterward. I don't talk about that night much because I know how it sounds. Folks say nerves can make you see things, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And even now, all these years later, if you gave me $1,000 to pull over on that bend, I wouldn't take it. Because some places aren't just haunted. They're marked, stained in a way that never washes off, and FM 920 will always be one of them. And if you don't believe me, go see for yourself. Just don't stop when you hear the chains, don't stop. I was driving west out of Weatherford one night. The highway stretched black and endless, the radio crackling with more static than music, when I first noticed him. At 60 miles per hour, the world outside should blur into streaks of shadow and light. But there he was, a man-shaped figure keeping pace with my car as if the laws of physics meant nothing to him. He wasn't just running, he was pounding the earth in long, impossibly fast strides, and every few seconds his body tilted toward me until his bloody palm slapped hard against the passenger side glass. The sound was sharp, wet, and final, like meat hitting a butcher's block. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks, that maybe headlights behind me were throwing strange shadows across the trees, but no. The figure had weight and presence, every impact against the window rattling in my bones. The highway was empty. No other cars, no houses, just the mesquite and the black outline of fence posts whipping by. My speedometer sat steady at 60, but the shadow man never fell behind, never wavered. He stayed locked beside me, his head turning toward mine, though the face was nothing but darkness, and each slap of his hand left a smear, thick red streaks that shouldn't have been there but were. I wanted to press harder on the gas, to leave him behind, but some primal part of me told me not to. That if I tried to outrun him, something worse would happen. My knuckles were white on the wheel, sweat dripping into my eyes, and the rhythmic sound of those palms striking my glass became unbearable. I told myself it was exhaustion. I'd been driving since sundown, coming back from a late job out in Mineral Wells, and maybe I'd nodded off, half dreaming with my eyes open. But then I felt the vibration through the floorboard, through the steering column. The impact of flesh against steel was real, too real. And when I risked a glance back, I saw smears of blood trailing along the side of my car, glistening in the dim wash of my taillights. The figure moved like a predator running a hunt, not even straining, just keeping level with me, as if mocking how fragile and slow I really was inside my machine. The worst part wasn't the running, though. It was the moments when his hand lingered on the window longer than a slap, dragging streaks that looked like claw marks across the glass, and I could see something beneath the darkness of his face. Teeth, maybe, or the impression of a grin pressed against the void. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the dashed white lines pulling me forward, but the noise grew louder, faster, until it seemed like his hands were slapping every inch of the car at once. Roof, trunk, both sides, as though there were more than one of him, or he was everywhere at once. When I finally reached a gas station lit up like a beacon on the edge of town, I swung hard into the lot and skidded to a stop beneath the fluorescent canopy. The world was suddenly still. The pumps were empty, the lot silent except for the buzzing lights, and when I looked, the figure was gone. I sat there shaking, engine ticking down, telling myself I was safe, that the presence had vanished with the highway. But when I got out and walked around to the passenger side, my breath caught in my throat. The window was smeared with handprints, bloody, wet, and still dripping down the door. I scrubbed at the glass with the hem of my shirt until my hands shook, but the stains wouldn't come out. They clung like they'd seeped into the car itself, part of the metal and glass now. I got back behind the wheel and drove home without looking at the mirrors once. But even now, weeks later, I swear I still hear it some nights when I'm alone, in bed. That steady rhythm, like palms slapping against glass in the dark, keeping pace with my breathing until I can't tell if it's outside the window or inside my head. And sometimes, when I'm driving the same stretch after dusk, the streaks appear again on the passenger side glass, fresh and red as though he's back beside me, running, waiting for me to look. Highway 281 runs long and lonely through the scrubland between Johnson City and Marble Falls, cutting across the dry limestone hills like a scar. If you've driven it at night, you've seen them. The white crosses hammered into the shoulder, each one a marker for the dead. A family's attempt to stitch grief into the landscape. Most are plain pine, some with little plaques screwed in, others with silk flowers bleached by sun and rain until they look like rags. I never thought much of them beyond the obvious sorrow. People drink, they drive too fast, and the highway doesn't forgive mistakes. But there was a stretch past mile marker 312 where the crosses didn't stay put. Folks in Blanco County will tell you the same if you catch them in the right mood, though they won't linger on the subject. They'll just shake their heads and mutter about staying on the main roads after dark. I first noticed it after one of my night shifts. I was working maintenance at a plant near Marble Falls back then, pulling long weeks. It was close to 2 in the morning when I saw a cross standing at the edge of the northbound lane, a fresh-looking one with white paint that gleamed in my headlights. I didn't remember it being there before. I slowed as I passed it, saw a bouquet of fake lilies jammed into the dirt at its base, then kept going. By the next evening, when I drove home in the opposite direction, the cross wasn't there. Instead, about a mile down the road near an old mesquite tree that had split in half from lightning, there it was again. Same lilies, same slanted handwriting on the plaque. For James. At first I figured I'd just misremembered. Maybe there were 2 crosses with the same name, though it seemed unlikely. But the pattern repeated. Each time I drove that stretch, the cross had shifted, moving mile by mile along the shoulder, never staying in the same place for long. It didn't just move forward either. Sometimes it slid back, sometimes across to the southbound side. I started keeping track, writing the dates and locations in a notebook I kept in my glove box. After 3 weeks, I had a map sketched out, a string of X's creeping up and down a 6-mile run of asphalt. No one else on the crew believed me when I mentioned it. They laughed, said maybe I was too tired, maybe I had a thing for roadside shrines. One guy told me to take a picture if I was so sure, but every time I tried, the cross wasn't where I thought it would be. I'd stop, get out of the truck, and find bare gravel. Then, a few nights later, it'd be back, standing proud as ever, lilies rattling in the breeze. Things escalated the night I ran out of gas near marker 314. I had ignored the low fuel light, thinking I could make it to Burnett, but the truck coughed and died right there on the shoulder. The only light came from a waxing moon and the glow of my hazard blinkers. I got out, cursing myself, and started walking. The night air carried the dry smell of cedar and the hum of cicadas. About 50 yards ahead, I saw it, the cross. For James. The lilies stirred even though the wind was still. I felt a prickling in my neck, that primitive animal alarm that something wasn't right. I slowed my pace, telling myself it was nothing, just wood and flowers. But when I drew even with it, I heard a sound I can only describe as someone dragging a length of chain through gravel. I froze. The noise circled me, crunching first from the ditch on my left, then from the middle of the road, though I could see nothing. My hazard lights flickered, dimmed, then went out altogether. The world dropped into silence so heavy my ears rang. Then came the whisper. Right behind me, as if someone's lips brushed the shell of my ear. You shouldn't have stopped. I spun around, fists up, heart pounding, but the shoulder was empty. When I turned back, the cross was closer, no more than 10 feet away, though I hadn't seen it move. The lilies were wet now, dripping as if pulled from water. The plaque gleamed, pale in the moonlight, and for the first time I saw that the name had changed. Not James anymore. It read my own. First and last, scratched in with something sharp. I ran. I sprinted down the road, legs burning, lungs raw, until I saw the distant glow of headlights. A farmer in an old Chevy slowed down enough to let me hop in the bed. I didn't tell him why I was out there. I didn't need him thinking I was crazy. When I went back the next morning with a gas can, my truck was where I'd left it, battery dead, hazards drained. The cross was gone. Only the crushed impressions of lilies lay in the dust where it had stood. I should have left it at that. Sold the truck, avoided 281, moved on. But the thing about curiosity is it rots you from the inside. I kept driving the road, making excuses to pass mile marker 312. And sure enough, the cross kept showing up. Some nights it was half a mile farther, north, some nights south. But always there, always moving, as if pacing. I tried to photograph it again, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my grip. But the film came back black. Later, when I tried with a disposable digital camera, the photos showed nothing but a smear of white glare, like headlights aimed straight at the lens. A month later, I heard about a wreck. A family sedan had gone off the shoulder near Marker, 313, father, mother, 2 kids. They didn't survive. When I drove by a few days later, I counted 4 new crosses hammered into the ground, lined up like soldiers, flowers taped to their arms. But as the weeks went by, they began to wander too, drifting mile by mile, appearing and reappearing in different places. One morning I found them bunched tight together at Marker 312, all 5 in a row, and I swear to you the lilies at the base were still wet, dripping onto the dust. People in Johnson City say the crosses move because the dead aren't settled. The highway doesn't just take lives, it keeps them, like a river pulling bodies along its current, never letting them climb out. The markers are dragged with them, shifting like buoys on black water. I don't know if I believe that, but I know what I've seen. The notebook I kept is still in my glove box, though I don't drive at night anymore. The last entry is the one that made me quit. August 14th, 3 a.m., Marker 312. 5 crosses lined in the ditch, and a 6th one in the middle of the road itself, standing upright in the asphalt as if the highway had grown it. I stopped the truck just long enough to read the name carved into it. My name again, only this time the date was added beneath, August 14th. That night, I turned the truck around and didn't look back. Now even in daylight, I can't shake the thought that the crosses are still out there, marching mile by mile, looking for me. And one night, when I'm careless or tired, I'll find mine waiting exactly where it's supposed to be. Highway 21 cuts through the pine forest like a dark scar. 2 narrow lanes of cracked asphalt threading between Lufkin and Bastrop, with only the occasional gas station or lonely trailer set back in the trees to remind you that people actually live out there. I've driven it more times than I can count, mostly late at night coming back from shifts when the road feels like it belongs to no one but you, and whatever is waiting just out of the headlights. The first time I heard the screaming was in late October, the kind of night when the air is heavy with damp pine needles and the sky is moonless, swallowing your high beams as if the dark itself is leaning down close. I was dead tired. The radio nothing but static between country stations, and I had just passed a hand-painted sign for boiled peanuts when I caught it. Faint at first, a woman's scream threading through the white noise. My head snapped toward the backseat mirror. Nothing but the red glow of my taillights stretching down the empty lane behind me. But the scream didn't stop. It rose sharp and desperate, echoing from inside the car itself as if someone was crouched right behind me with her mouth pressed to my ear. I swerved, nearly running off the shoulder, and when I whipped around to look into the back seat, it was empty. I told myself I'd imagined it, fatigue playing tricks. That kind of road breeds imagination. Every shadow between the pines looks like it's leaning toward the asphalt. Every gust through the trees sounds like whispers. Still, the next week I mentioned it to a buddy of mine who drives rigs, and his face changed in a way that made my stomach drop. He'd heard it too, he said, more than once. Same stretch, always late at night, always the same sound. A woman screaming like she's being murdered inside your own car, but there's no one there. He wouldn't take that highway anymore after dark. I should have left it alone, but something about it kept pulling me back. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe morbid curiosity, but the more I heard other stories, the more I had to know. An old man at a roadside diner near Crockett told me she'd been a hitchhiker back in the 70s, picked up by a trucker who did terrible things and dumped her body in the woods near a marker that's since been replaced. A waitress swore, up and down, that if you stop your car when you hear the scream and leave the back door unlocked, she'll climb inside. The stories were all different, but the detail was always the same. She screams from the back seat, and you can see her face only if you're unlucky enough to look long enough in the mirror. The third time it happened to me, I didn't just keep driving. I slowed, heart hammering, the scream clawing at the inside of my skull. And I looked. This time I saw her. Just a flash, caught in the reflection as the dome light flickered on when I braked. A pale face pressed against the glass, mouth wide, eyes nothing but black sockets that seemed to swallow the glow of the dashboard. Then gone. The scream cut off so suddenly it left a ringing silence, and I was left sitting on the shoulder with my hands trembling on the wheel, the smell of wet pine and something coppery filling the car. I didn't drive Highway 21 at night for months after that, but avoiding it didn't change anything. People I knew, people I trusted told me their own versions. One woman said she saw the passenger window fog with a breath that wasn't hers, words spelled faintly in the condensation, "Help." Me, a college kid, swore he felt fingernails rake down the back of his seat. A deputy sheriff admitted under his breath that he once pulled over thinking a woman was screaming inside a passing car, only to find it empty, the driver pale and shaking, claiming he'd nearly lost control from the sound. It got so I couldn't go to a bar or gas station in those parts without hearing someone mutter about her. I kept thinking about the woods, the endless miles of them, dark and tight against the highway, swallowing everything. It's not hard to believe someone could disappear out there. Never found. One night, against every ounce of sense, I went back. Parked at the mile stretch where most people said it happened, right near an old concrete culvert half hidden by brush. Midnight. Windows rolled down. I killed the engine and just sat. The night pressing close, frogs croaking in the distance, cicadas sawing at the air. At first, nothing but silence. Then it came, faint at first, rising fast. That scream. It filled the car again, so loud, I clapped, my hands over my ears, but it was inside, vibrating the glass, rattling the mirror, and this time the back door latch clicked open on its own. Just a soft sound, but it froze me. I didn't look in the mirror, couldn't. The scream cut off like a knife, and all I could hear was my own breathing. When I finally slammed the car into gear and tore down the road, the back door slammed shut on its own as if someone had just gotten comfortable in the seat behind me. I don't drive Highway 21 anymore. I won't. But sometimes when I'm alone on another back road, I still catch it faint in the static of the radio, or in the whoosh of the wind through the cracked window. A woman screaming, close, too close. And for the rest of the drive, I can't stop glancing at the mirror, afraid of what I'll see sitting there waiting. The station had been closed for years. Everyone in town knew it, or at least they thought they did. Out on Highway 87 between Eden and Brady, there was a squat concrete building with busted windows, its sun-bleached awning hanging low, one corner, twisted from a long-ago storm. A rusted sign leaned half-cocked at the edge of the lot, its lettering so faded you had to squint to tell it once advertised Texaco. The pumps had been left standing, islands of rust and peeling paint, with their hoses like black snakes coiled stiff and brittle from years in the sun. Most folks drove past without a thought, same as they'd drive past an abandoned barn or a dead cotton field. It was just another skeleton on a Texas backroad, something left behind. But every so often someone would notice the way one pump would click, the handle jerking faintly as if someone invisible had lifted it, and the nozzle hanging loose would drip fuel onto the cracked concrete. People said you could smell it raw and sharp like the air around a refinery, even though the tanks underground had supposedly been empty since the mid-90s. I didn't believe it, not at first. My Uncle Bud had told me the story when I was staying with him one summer, working fence lines out near Menard. We were sitting on his porch one night, beers sweating on the railing, cicadas raising hell in the mesquite. He said, "Don't stop at that old Texaco after dark. Pump number 2's still running, and if you hear it start up, you better keep going." I thought he was just screwing with me, the way old-timers like to scare the younger ones. But he wasn't smiling when he said it. He looked dead serious, like a man remembering something that had happened to him and wishing he could forget. The first time I drove past it alone was about a week later. I was coming back from Brady with a bed full of feed sacks, half drunk on Dr. Pepper and highway boredom. The sun was bleeding out behind the horizon, the last of its light laying everything in that dusty orange glow that only lasts a few minutes in Texas before night swallows the land whole. I crested a hill and there it was, that station just squatting out there like a tomb. I slowed without meaning to, eyes catching the pump island, and I swear I saw it. The handle on the far pump twitched, metal knocking against the side, and then the sound came, a solid click, same as when you squeeze the trigger to fuel up. Then the faint gurgle of liquid moving through a hose, and before I knew it, the smell hit me. Gasoline, fresh, strong enough that I could taste it on the back of my tongue. I pressed the gas and didn't look back, but I thought about it the rest of the night. How could there be fuel in a pump that hadn't been connected to anything in decades? The underground tanks should have been bone dry, maybe filled with dirt or water by now. And who or what was squeezing the trigger? 2 nights later, I went back. Curiosity's got a way of eating at me worse than hunger. I parked my truck at the edge of the lot with the headlights off, the whole place lit only by a fat moon and the weak orange glow of a distant yard light. The station looked worse up close, its walls tagged with faded graffiti, door chained shut, weeds pushing through every crack in the concrete. I got out, boots crunching gravel, and walked toward the pumps. My heart thudded so loud it drowned out the night insects. Pump number 2 stood crooked, its glass display fogged with grime, numbers frozen mid-turn. The nozzle hung limp, hose cracked and stiff, but the smell was there. Gasoline, strong enough to burn my sinuses. I waited, watching, and for a while, nothing happened. The wind shifted, carrying a dry rustle of mesquite branches. An owl called. Then, without warning, the pump handle snapped up, hard enough to rattle metal against metal, and I heard the trigger squeeze. A sudden whoosh of liquid surged through the hose, and the nozzle spit a thin stream of gasoline onto the pavement. It splashed at my boots, cold against the night heat, and the smell hit me like a wave. My stomach knotted. I stumbled back, gagging, but my eyes locked on the numbers in the display. They were moving, slow, deliberate, clicking forward as gallons, and cents rolled upward like someone was buying fuel at that very moment. Except there was no one there, no car, no hand holding the nozzle. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. Then I heard something else, faint but clear. Breathing. Not mine. It came from right beside me, ragged, wet, as if someone was standing inches away. The nozzle jerked sideways, spraying across the pump island, and I heard the squeak of shoes on wet concrete. Invisible footsteps pacing slow, circling the pump. My breath froze in my chest. The display numbers spun faster, clattering forward, gallons upon gallons being pumped into nothing. Then, as suddenly as it started, the nozzle fell still, clanging, against the side of the pump. The numbers stopped. The breathing stopped. Only the drip of gasoline remained, tapping steady against the concrete. I bolted back to my truck and didn't slow down until I was halfway to Eden. When I told Uncle Bud what I'd seen, he didn't laugh. He just nodded slow and said, "That pump's been feeding something for a long time. Don't go back." But I did go back. A week later, and then again after that. It became a sickness, a need. Each time I returned, the pump would wake quicker, as if it knew me now. Sometimes it would spray more violently, coating the ground until the whole lot reeked like a refinery spill. Sometimes I'd hear whispers under the sound of liquid, words I couldn't make out, low and curling like smoke in my ears. One night, I swore I saw shapes in the mist rising off the spilled fuel, faces twisted and gaunt, mouths moving without sound. The worst was when I looked at the glass display and saw my own reflection staring back at me. But it wasn't mine. The face was older, haggard, eyes hollow and sunken like someone who hadn't slept in years. I don't go there anymore. I try not to anyway. But sometimes I'll be driving that stretch after dark and I'll smell it. Gasoline, sharp and raw, leaking through the vents of my truck though the windows are rolled up tight, and I'll hear that click, faint but steady, like a metronome keeping time with the beating of my heart. That pump is still running, out there in the dark, feeding something that never gets full. And one night, I know it'll be waiting for me again. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just one of those tricks of light you get out on a back road after midnight. The stretch of ranch road between Stamford and Anson has always been lonesome country. Miles of caliche dust, fence lines, sagging in the heat, mesquite standing like crooked sentinels under the moon. I was heading back from a late delivery run, Too much caffeine in my veins, my eyes burning from the glare of my own headlights cutting through the night. That was when I caught sight of it in the rearview mirror. A Jeep. Old, boxy, the kind you don't see on the highway much anymore, with the kind of squared grille that looks almost like a face grinning at you through the dark. The weird part wasn't the Jeep itself, it was its lights. Up close, as it rolled behind me, the headlights looked busted out, jagged sockets of black, but in my mirror reflected, those beams burned like two white suns, so bright I had to angle the mirror just to keep from being blinded. At first, I figured it was a busted truck somebody had patched together wrong, maybe fitted with fog lamps, but the angles didn't add up. No matter how I adjusted, the light didn't come from the road. It came from the glass of the mirror itself, as if the Jeep's reflection was brighter than the real thing. I slowed down once, thinking maybe I was tired. Maybe I needed to stop. But when my speed dipped, so did his. When I accelerated, so did he. Always the same distance, 30 yards behind, not gaining, not falling back. The road was straight and empty, so there was no reason I shouldn't have heard his tires, his engine, something. But the night was dead quiet, just the hum of my pickup. There's a turnoff near a rusted windmill where the fence line splits into a field road. I cut my blinker on and eased over, letting the Jeep pass if it wanted, but it didn't. It slowed too, staying behind me, those broken dark sockets still aimed at my bumper, the reflection still burning my mirror white hot. I eased onto the gravel shoulder and came to a full stop. The Jeep rolled up behind me, close, enough that I should have seen the driver's face through the windshield, close enough that I should have heard the crunch of its tires. But I saw nothing. The windshield was pitch black, like someone had spray painted it from the inside, and the sound, there wasn't any. My pickup idled, rattling in the still air, and behind me that Jeep sat motionless, silent, its hood shimmering faintly like heat rising off asphalt, though the night was cool. I snapped the gear into drive and tore out of there, kicking up a trail of caliche dust. The Jeep didn't hesitate. In the mirror, the beams flared bright again, pinning me like a bug in a jar. My radio crackled with static, the country station cutting in and out, then a high-pitched whine that hurt my teeth. My phone, tossed in the cup holder, lit up with notifications that weren't there, just flashing and buzzing with no number, no caller ID. I pressed harder on the gas, taking the bends sharper than I should have, gravel spitting under the tires. Still the Jeep came, never swerving, never lagging. It felt less like I was being followed and more like I was tethered, like that thing was locked to me and no amount of speed or turns could shake it. At one point I killed my headlights, figuring maybe if I went dark he'd lose me. The ranch road lay out flat and pale under the moon, and my truck rolled forward like a ghost. In the mirror, the Jeep's light still blazed, but when I glanced back through the rear window, there was nothing on the road, only in the mirror. It was there and not there, both at once. My gut clenched with something colder than fear, something primal that told me I wasn't just being chased, I was being marked. I don't remember how long it lasted. Time stretched out, the road unspooling like ribbon, the mesquite crowding closer on either side. At some point, I hit the intersection by the abandoned cotton gin, where the county road meets the state highway. I cut sharp onto the asphalt, figuring if I could get closer to town, maybe I'd feel sane again. For the first time since it appeared, the Jeep lagged. The lights flickered in the mirror, stuttered, then winked out. I checked the rear window, empty road. I drove the rest of the way with my heart hammering like a drum, waiting for it to flare back up behind me, but it didn't. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands shook so bad I could barely kill the ignition. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept thinking I'd hear tires crunching in the caliche outside, or see twin beams sweep across my bedroom wall. Instead, I woke to silence, the world ordinary again. The only thing out of place was my mirror. The glass was cracked, a thin line running right through the center like it had been struck from the inside. My truck sat parked, untouched otherwise. But when the dawn light hit just right, I swear I saw a smear across the crack. Something dark, something oily, shaped like the edge of a palm. I told myself it was exhaustion, nothing more. But every night since, when I drive that stretch of road, I catch myself watching the mirror. Some nights it's empty, some nights it's not. And when I see those bright beams burning where no headlights should be, I keep driving. Because I know if I stop, if I let it pull up close again, I'll see more than a cracked windshield or a dark cab. I'll see the face behind the glass, and I don't think I'd survive knowing what rides in that Jeep. The red lights of the railroad crossing out past Navarro shimmered faintly in the heat, though no train ever seemed to use those tracks anymore. Folks in town said they'd been abandoned after the grain plant shut down in the 90s, but the arms still dropped now and then, flashing their warnings like the ghost of an old system refusing to die. I used to pass that crossing every Friday night when I drove home from my job in Corsicana. It was nothing special, just another strip of cracked blacktop stretching between mesquite groves and empty fields. But one night in August, I saw him. Had the window cracked for air, the radio humming out some old George Strait tune, when I noticed a man standing dead center at the crossing. He was waving one arm, palm up, the way you'd wave at someone to slow down or stop. I pressed the brakes, dust rising behind me. He wore what looked like an old work shirt tucked into jeans, tall boots, a belt with a big brass buckle that caught the glow of my headlights. His face was shadowed beneath the bill of a cap. I rolled down the window farther and leaned out, meaning to ask if he needed help. But before I said a word, I heard it, the low, thrumming rumble of a train. At first I thought it was the tires on my own truck rolling against the tar, but then the rails began to shake. The crossing lights blinked to life, strobing red across his figure. He pointed sharply at me, signaling again to stop. I gripped the wheel foot on the brake and waited. The sound built into a roar. I could almost feel the gust of air pressing forward, the thunder of 100 tons of metal barreling near. My heart kicked hard because those rails were supposed to be dead. They hadn't carried a train in decades. Yet I swore I could see the shimmer of headlamps coming down the track. I blinked and everything was gone. The man, the sound, the shiver in the rails. Even the crossing lights had gone dark. I sat in the middle of the road with nothing but cicadas rattling in the mesquite, and my engine idling loud in my ears. I cursed under my breath, too shaken to move, until I finally pressed the gas and rolled over the rails. My headlights swept across emptiness. I told myself I'd been tired, maybe half dozing after the long week. But when I mentioned it at home, my dad set down his beer and gave me a look I didn't forget. "You saw him too?" he asked. He said back when he was my age, he and his buddies had gone drinking out by Richland Creek. Driving back, one of them swore he saw a man waving them down at the same crossing. They slowed, thinking maybe it was a cop. A second later, a freight train screamed by so fast the wind nearly ripped the hats off their heads. When the caboose clattered past, the man was gone, and when they checked with the station in town the next day, no train had been scheduled anywhere near Navarro. The story sat with me like a lump in my gut. I told myself I wouldn't drive that way anymore. But the following Friday, stubborn as I was, I did. It was hotter that night, heat lightning flickering on the horizon. When I came up on the crossing, I gripped the wheel tight, eyes flicking side to side. Sure enough, there he was again, standing stiff in the middle of the rails. This time I noticed details I hadn't before. The grime on his shirt, the way the fabric pulled at the shoulder as though it had been torn once, the black smear across his cheek. He didn't wave immediately. He just stared, head slightly tilted. Then slowly his hand rose, palm open, warning me again. The lights burst on. The rails trembled. The roar filled the night. My headlights glared across empty track, but my bones swore a train was about to barrel through. I braked hard, sweat breaking across my forehead. And then I blinked. Silence. Darkness. No man. No train. Just me, heart slamming in my chest. I drove home shaking, told myself I'd had enough. But that weekend, curiosity got the better of me. I asked around town, and old folks at the diner shared their whispers. Some said a brakeman had been crushed there in the 50s, pinned when two freights collided on a foggy morning. Others claimed it was a farmer who'd stalled out on the tracks, waving desperately for cars to stop before the train hit him. There wasn't a straight version of the tale, but everyone agreed on one thing. Sometimes the dead tried to warn the living. I swore I'd listen. But weeks passed and the warnings turned stranger. One night I saw him not at the crossing but standing on the shoulder a mile before, flagging me down as though he wanted me to pull over. Another night I caught him in the rearview mirror even after I'd passed the rails, a figure in the darkness, raising his arm, urging me to stop though the road stretched empty behind me. The worst was in late September. A thunderstorm had rolled through, leaving the road slick. I was driving back around midnight, wipers squealing across the windshield. As I neared the crossing, the lights snapped on before I saw him, red beams slicing through the rain, bells clanging in the night. My tires hissed as I hit the brakes, headlights glaring against the sheets of water. He was there, drenched, arm waving furiously now, almost desperate. The roar of the train was deafening, closer than ever, metal screaming, as though the rails would split. I swore I could see sparks flashing along the line, a hot blast of wind curling into my truck. I blinked hard against the rain, and the world went silent again. But the silence wasn't right. My truck engine had died. The radio was dead. Even the rain seemed muted against the windshield. And in the middle of the road, just beyond the crossing, stood the man. Not waving this time, just staring, his cap tilted up so I could see his face. It was wrong. His eyes were sockets burned black, his jaw twisted as though broken. He lifted, his arm not to warn me but to point straight at me. The power slammed back into the truck with a jolt that nearly threw me against the wheel. I floored the gas, barreled over the tracks, and didn't stop until I was home with the doors locked. That was the last time I ever drove that road. But sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I hear it again. The long, thunderous roar of a train that doesn't exist, the bell clanging in the dark, and a man's hand rising in warning or accusation, I can't decide which. And I wonder how many times I blinked without realizing what was supposed to come next. Highway 16 runs long and lonesome through the hill country, cutting across stretches of limestone bluffs, mesquite brush, and cattle pastures where the wind makes a lonely whistling sound through the barbed wire. People say the road has a way of playing tricks on tired drivers. You might see a dog that isn't there, or headlights in your rear view that vanish when you blink. But there's one story that's darker, whispered at gas stations and diners between Kerrville and Medina, and I didn't believe it until I saw her myself one night. They call her the crawling woman of Highway 16, and if you ever see her in your headlights, it's already too late to forget. It was late spring, the air still warm from the day, cicadas buzzing so loud in the trees that their hum followed me even inside the cab of my truck. I had just left a small gathering at a buddy's place near Bandera. A couple of beers, nothing more, and I was clear-headed enough to make the 40-minute drive back to Kerrville. The highway was empty as far as I could see, the yellow lines glowing faint in the beams of my headlights, the sky overhead dark and heavy without a moon. There's a stretch out there where the trees press close, and the road dips and bends so you don't see what's ahead until you're right on top of it. I had just taken one of those turns when I noticed something crouched on the asphalt up ahead. At first I thought it was a deer, the way it moved low to the ground. But then the shape dragged itself forward, slow and strange, its long hair sweeping across the blacktop like a mop dipped in tar. My hands tightened on the wheel and the truck's beams cut across her body. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a woman, pale-skinned, wearing some kind of torn dress, crawling on all fours like she didn't know how to stand. Her knees and palms hit the pavement, scraping along as if none of it hurt. But what made my stomach drop wasn't that. It was that she had no shadow. The light hit her straight on, but the ground under her stayed flat and empty, like she was hovering just above the road even though I could hear the scrape of her hands and knees against the asphalt. I swerved into the other lane, heart pounding, convinced I'd hit her if I didn't. For a second she turned her head toward me, hair falling back, and I caught a glimpse of her face. Her eyes were too wide, black where there should have been, white, and her mouth opened in a scream I couldn't hear but felt, deep in my chest like a vibration running through the steering column. Then she was gone. Just gone. My headlights swept the road empty, No body, no shape, not even the drag of hair where she'd been. I slowed, checking the mirrors, half expecting to see her crawling behind me, but the night stretched quiet and bare. I tried to laugh it off as one of those tricks the dark plays on tired men, but the unease clung to me all the way home. It wasn't until the next day that I mentioned it to a coworker, a guy who grew up out there. His face went pale before I'd even finished, and he told me flat out never to stop if I saw her again. Folks around there knew the story. They said she'd been a young woman killed on that road decades ago, dragged by a truck for nearly a mile before anyone realized she was tangled in the chain at the bumper. Others said she'd been dumped there after a murder, her body left crawling for help that never came. Nobody agreed on how she died, but everyone knew the same thing. She still crawls, and if you pull over, if you stop for her, you won't make it home. That should have been enough to keep me from thinking about it. But nights on Highway 16 have a way of stirring things up. A month later, after a late shift, I found myself driving the same stretch. My stomach tightened as I hit that bend, and damned if the air didn't grow cold inside the cab though the heater was running. I told myself not to look, just keep my eyes on the lines, but then something shifted in the corner of my vision. Hair dragging, hands scraping. And there she was again, crawling along the center stripe, slow and steady as if she'd been waiting for me all that time. This time I saw her mouth moving, whispering words I couldn't hear over the hum of my tires, but I felt them pressing against me, syllables pushing through the glass of the cab. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles went white, and my vision tunneled to the beam of the headlights. The road seemed endless, the lines unspooling without end, and in my mirrors I swore I saw her, not behind me but alongside, crawling just outside the cone of light, keeping pace though my truck was moving at 60 miles per hour. Her hair dragged but never caught, and her body made no shadow at all. I tried to look away, tried to force my eyes to stay forward, but something about her pulled me, the way a cliff edge calls to a man to jump. When the highway finally straightened, I pressed the gas hard, pushing past 70, then 80. The cab rattled, but the road ahead opened clear, and just like before, she was gone. The stretch of asphalt lay bare under the beams, empty, almost, too empty, as if it had never held her at all. I made it home drenched in sweat, heart still hammering. I told no one this time. What good would it do? They'd just say the same thing. Don't stop, keep driving, pretend you didn't see. The worst came later, weeks after I thought I was done with it. I was at home sitting up late with the TV humming low when I heard the scrape. Not outside, not across the driveway or on the porch, but inside the walls. A steady dragging, palm and knee, moving slow across the floorboards though I was alone. My breath caught, and in the dark corner by the hallway I saw it. Hair first, spilling out like a dark flood, then the pale form crawling into the glow of the screen. She was in my house moving toward me, her mouth still whispering those words I couldn't hear but felt, pressing against my skin like hands. And there, under the glow of the television, I saw it again, her body pale and broken but no shadow stretching out beneath her. That's when I knew it wasn't just Highway 16 that she haunted. It was me. And once you see her crawling in, your lights, once you catch her eyes on that lonely road, she doesn't stay there. She follows, she waits, and sooner or later, she drags herself into your home, whispering in the dark until you can't tell if you're awake or dreaming. I don't drive that stretch anymore, but I still hear her sometimes, late at night, scraping across the floor, coming closer. I keep the lights on, every damn one in the house, but it doesn't matter, because she doesn't cast shadows, and shadows are the only thing light can chase away. The first time I saw the barn, I was driving back from San Angelo after a long Saturday spent visiting a friend who had just moved into a ranch house out there. It was late March, the kind of spring night when the temperature dips just enough after sunset to make the air feel cooler than it really is, with a faint smell of mesquite smoke drifting from somewhere unseen. I had the windows rolled down, radio low, and the road mostly to myself. Highway 87 stretches long and flat, with Occasional turns that force your headlights to slice through stretches of cedar and scrub. I knew that road well enough not to expect anything surprising, but about 20 minutes south of Paint Rock, I rounded a bend and caught sight of something that made me tap the brakes. There it was, standing at the edge of the road like it had been waiting. A barn. Not a new one, not one of those glossy aluminum sheds ranchers throw up to store equipment, but an old-fashioned red barn, the kind you see in faded photographs. Its boards were weathered, paint dull but still red enough to show against the night. The roof sagged slightly and the big double doors stood half open. A light glowed faintly inside, like lantern fire through dusty glass. I slowed down, trying to remember if I had ever noticed it before. I drove this stretch often enough to know every cattle guard and mailbox, but this barn was new to me. I told myself it wasn't strange. Maybe it was farther back from the road and the landowner had cleared some brush, making it visible now. But the more I thought about it, the more it unsettled me. What rancher leaves a lantern burning inside an abandoned-looking barn at midnight? My instinct told me to keep driving, and that's what I did, watching it in the mirror until the road dipped and the trees swallowed it. The next morning, when I headed back the same way in daylight, I expected to see it again. I kept an eye on the mile markers, slowing down at the spot where I knew it should be. But there was nothing. Just pasture land, barbed wire fences, and the rolling Texas countryside. No barn, no trace of one ever being there. I told myself I had imagined it, maybe confused a distant shed or a house with a barn. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. The second time was 3 weeks later. I was coming home late from a funeral in Eden, the kind of event that leaves your head heavy and your heart heavier. The sky was dark with no moon, and the road felt lonelier than usual. As I passed that same stretch, my headlights picked it out again. The barn. Same dull red boards, same sagging roof, same faint glow inside. This time the doors were closed, but the cracks leaked light like something bright burned just beyond the wood. I slowed almost to a stop, curiosity getting the better of me. I rolled down the passenger window, expecting to hear crickets or cattle lowing in the distance. Instead, I heard something else. A muffled sound, low and rhythmic, almost like someone humming. My skin prickled, and I felt the weight of something, staring back from inside the barn even though I couldn't see anyone. I pressed the gas hard and got out of there, heart racing. Over the next few months, I asked around, careful not to sound crazy. Friends from San Angelo, ranchers who had lived in that area their whole lives, even a sheriff's deputy I knew from church. Nobody knew about a barn standing by the highway in that stretch. They looked at me like I was mixing it up with another. One old rancher told me that years ago in the 1950s or maybe earlier, there had been a homestead out that way, a big family farm, but it had burned to the ground after a lightning strike. He said the fire had spread fast, killing half the family before they could get out. He didn't know about a barn, just remembered hearing his daddy talk about it. I tried to let it go, but part of me couldn't. I started making excuses to drive that way late at night. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. When it appeared, it always looked the same. The glow inside never bright, just dim enough to remind you it was occupied. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes moving through the cracks, shadows crossing in front of the light. One night I swear I saw a figure leaning against the doorway, tall and thin, head tilted like it was waiting for me. I didn't slow down that time. I pressed the accelerator until the engine whined. The barn began to creep into my dreams. I'd see myself walking down that empty stretch of road, moon high overhead, and the barn standing open at the edge of the fence line. The glow would spill onto the dirt and I would hear the humming again, louder this time with words I couldn't understand. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding like I'd been running. The last time I saw it was the worst. I had been in Brady visiting a client and drove back later than I meant to. It was just past 2 a.m. when I hit that stretch, and sure enough, there it was again. But this time, it looked different. The glow wasn't faint. It was burning bright, spilling through the cracks and seams in the wood like fire trapped inside. The doors shook against the frame and the humming was loud enough to rattle the air as I approached. I slowed down without meaning to, caught between fear and fascination. The barn seemed alive, pulsing like a heart about to burst. Then I saw them, figures inside, pressed up against the wood from within, their outlines clear against the light. Dozens of them, tall and short, thin and broad, all pushing against the walls, their hands splayed against the boards. The wood bowed out like it couldn't hold them much longer. And above the humming came something else, a scream, long and sharp, the sound of someone burning alive. I floored it, tires spitting gravel, and didn't stop until I was back in town. The rearview mirror showed only darkness, the road empty behind me. The next morning I drove back in daylight, desperate to prove something to myself. There was nothing there, just pasture and cedar brush. But the dirt shoulder looked disturbed, like something heavy had stood there in the night. I don't drive that way anymore. If I have to head south, I take the long route. Friends still laugh when I tell them, saying I must have been half asleep or mixing up my landmarks, but I know what I saw. And sometimes when I wake up in the dark, I still hear the humming in the back of my skull, like it's calling me back to the barn that only stands when the night is deep enough. And if I ever do stop, if I ever give in to the pull and walk through those doors, I know I won't be coming back out by morning. The wind can roll in out of nowhere in West Texas, turning the sky to a dim copper haze that makes the horizon disappear and the world shrink to the few feet in front of your headlights. Folks out there are used to it. They pull their scarves up, tighten their hats, hunker down until the gusts pass. But one dust storm last spring brought something different with it, something people still don't talk about unless they've had one too many whiskeys and the jukebox is playing too loud. That's when I first heard about the man who leans against your car in the storm, tips his hat and whispers directions to places you won't find on any map. I was driving east on Highway 84, a stretch of nothing but barbed wire fences, mesquite scrub, and telephone poles that leaned like they'd been tired since the 70s. The weather had been mild that day, hot like always, but with a crispness that comes before a front. I had been on the road for hours, headed to Lubbock from Snyder after visiting my uncle, and the sun was sliding down when the wind picked up. One minute the horizon was open, flat, endless, and the next it was gone, swallowed by a wall of red dust. The grit hit the windshield with a dry hiss so thick I couldn't see the stripes on the asphalt. I slowed to 30, then 20, then 10, until I finally pulled over onto the shoulder and just sat there, the car shuddering against the gale. That's when I heard it. A tapping sound on the passenger side window, faint but steady, like fingers brushing glass. At first I thought it was branches or debris blowing, but there weren't any trees for miles. Then the tapping grew louder, more deliberate, until it was a firm knock. I tried to ignore it, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the smear of brown where the sky used to be. My heart was thudding hard, the way it does when you know something is wrong but can't explain why. Finally, I turned my head, and there he was. A man in a dark coat, broad hat pulled low against the dust, was leaning his shoulder casually against my car door like we were old friends caught in the same storm. His face was half hidden in the shadow of the brim, but I could see the dust sliding across his cheeks as though the wind never touched him. He tilted his head toward me and then lowered his hand to tap once more on the glass. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear anything through the howl of the wind. Against my better judgment, I hit the switch and rolled the window down just a crack. That was enough. The storm's roar was muted, the dust didn't blow in, and through that sliver of space his voice slipped, calm as a man giving directions to the nearest diner. "You're lost," he said, his tone slow and certain. "I can show you the way." I opened my mouth to tell him I wasn't lost, that I was just waiting it out, but the words stuck. Something about the way he leaned there, his hat dipping forward, made my throat tighten. He smiled faintly, like he already knew what I was going to say. Then he gave me directions. "Turn off at the next county road, go 7 miles, take a left at the windmill. You'll find what you're looking for," he whispered, the words almost swallowed by the storm. And then he stepped back, touched the brim of his hat, and the window was clear again. The storm still raged, but he was gone. No footprints, no shadow, Nothing. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the stress of the storm was playing tricks, but when I pulled back onto the road, my hands shook so badly I almost drove off into the ditch. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to follow his directions, but every signpost I passed seemed to echo his words, pointing me toward that turnoff. And when I reached it, a dirt road barely wide enough for a truck, I slowed down. My headlights cut into the storm and lit up the shape of an old windmill in the distance, its blades groaning in the wind. My pulse quickened, and without meaning to, I turned. The road narrowed as I drove, the dust swirling thicker until the world outside the headlights dissolved completely. I felt like I was driving into nothingness, the car floating in a sea of rust-colored air. Then the beams caught something up ahead, a fence line broken and sagging with a gate hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, a cluster of low buildings slouched in the dirt. Barns, maybe, or shacks. The dust swirled so heavy around them they looked half submerged, like wrecks at the bottom of a murky sea. I stopped the car. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. Something was wrong with those buildings. They didn't look abandoned, so much as unfinished, like they had never been real to begin with. The boards seemed too thin, the angles too sharp, and as I squinted through the windshield, I realized they weren't standing still. The outlines wavered, bending like heat mirages, walls fading in and out with the rhythm of the storm. I put the car in reverse, heart hammering, but the tires spun uselessly in the dirt. The storm pressed down heavy, and the figure of the man reappeared by the gate, standing in the dust as if he'd been waiting the whole time. His face was still hidden, but his hand lifted slowly, pointing deeper into the shimmer of buildings. His voice carried over the storm, clear and sharp in my ears even though the wind should have drowned it. "Go on," he said. "They're waiting." I don't know what he meant, and I don't want to. I slammed the car into drive, gunned the engine, and plowed past him, swerving back toward the main road. I didn't care if I shredded the tires or tore out the suspension, I just needed to get away. The storm followed for miles, clinging like it wanted to drag me back. But when I finally burst out into clear night, stars shining over the plains, the road behind me was empty. No storm, no dust, just blacktop stretching flat to the horizon. I didn't see him again, but I've heard others have. Folks whisper about him in towns all across that stretch of Texas. A man who leans against your car during the worst storms, offering you directions to places that don't exist. Places that maybe shouldn't exist. Most people laugh it off, but every once in a while a car disappears out there, gone without a trace, and the locals just shake their heads. They say the storm got them, but I know better. I still dream about that gate, and the way those buildings shimmered in the dust, like they were waiting for me to step inside. And sometimes when the wind kicks up at night and rattles the windows, I swear I hear a voice whispering through the cracks, calm and steady, asking if I'm still lost. The first time I saw it was on a stretch of road most people avoided after dark. It was a 2-lane strip of asphalt running through a thicket of oak and cedar about 20 miles outside of Mineral Wells, the kind of road that curved and dipped, just enough to keep you awake but felt like it hadn't seen a city maintenance truck in decades. The trees pressed close to the edges, branches dangling low, the kind of place where high beams never felt like they were enough. I was driving home from a late shift at the plant, maybe 1 in the morning, when the headlights caught something round and black rolling out of the trees on the right. At first I thought it was a wild hog charging, but then I saw it bouncing, turning end over end, not wobbling the way a discarded tire should, but keeping perfect balance as it found the shoulder and tipped onto the pavement. It rolled ahead of me with eerie precision, every bounce in rhythm with the speedometer needle as though it knew exactly how fast I was going. My hands tightened on the wheel. The radio static seemed louder. And then, just as my nerves were about to give in, the tire tipped over gently on its side and slid into the shadows as if someone had lifted it away. I told myself it was nothing, just an old tire dislodged from the brush, maybe rolled down a hill, but the memory stayed lodged in me like a thorn. 2 nights later, driving the same stretch, I saw it again. Same shape, same bounce, like it was waiting. I slowed down, heart pounding, and sure enough, it matched me, rolling faster when I pressed the pedal, slowing when I eased off. My headlights shone right through the spokes, and for a second it almost looked like something darker than night sat inside the circle. When it fell over this time, it didn't vanish into the brush. It tipped flat and slid across the asphalt like it was being dragged by invisible hands. When I passed the spot seconds later, the road was bare. I stopped telling myself it was coincidence when I heard about other drivers. A trucker at the diner swore something rolled in front of his rig one night, and his load shifted so bad he nearly jackknifed. He didn't stop to see what it was, just swore off that road for good. A local woman whispered about seeing a tire chase her son's car until he hit 90 on the straightaway. He came home pale as death, said the thing didn't bounce off potholes or rocks, just skimmed smooth like the road belonged to it. People started calling it the rolling devil. Most laughed, chalked it up to small-town stories, but those of us who'd seen it didn't laugh. We drove detours, wasted gas just to stay off that cursed stretch. I made the mistake of trying to prove it wasn't real. One Friday night, curiosity got the better of me. I parked my truck at the pull-off where the brush grew thick and waited, with a flashlight. The night was humid, heavy with the smell of cedar and dust. Around 2 I heard it, the faint hollow thump of rubber against asphalt. My skin prickled as the sound grew louder. Then it appeared, rolling out of the tree line as though gravity didn't matter. I shined my light on it and the beam bent around it like the tire swallowed it whole. I swear I saw letters etched into the rubber, words that weren't any brand I knew, letters twisted like they were written backward. It rolled right past me, even though there wasn't a slope, like it chose its own path. When I lunged forward, hand out to stop it, the air around it turned ice cold, colder than anything I'd felt in Texas summer. My flashlight flickered, and for half a heartbeat I saw a face in the black circle where the hub should have been. Hollow eyes, a mouth stretched into a grin too wide for a human skull. I fell back and the tire tipped over, vanishing in silence. When my flashlight steadied, there was nothing but empty road. After that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the steady thump of rubber hitting pavement, the sound of something that shouldn't be alive keeping pace with me. My dreams showed me long roads stretching forever, a single black tire chasing me faster and faster, until it tipped and fell, and then the face appeared in the circle and it whispered my name. I thought maybe it was just madness until I found the mark. One morning, walking out to my truck, I saw a dark ring burned into the concrete by the rear tire. Perfectly round, black as if scorched, but the rubber on my own tires was fine. I tried, scrubbing it out, even pouring bleach, but it stayed. Every morning it was there, no matter where I parked. I started hearing of people vanishing. A high school kid who took the back road home after football practice, his car found idling with the door wide open. A couple from out of town who thought the shortcut would save them 20 minutes, their belongings scattered on the shoulder, but no footprints leading away. Each time, the sheriff said coyotes, bad terrain, maybe they just ran off. But I'd seen the look in his eyes when someone mentioned the rolling devil. He knew. He'd seen it too. I lasted 3 more weeks before it came for me in earnest. I was driving home, storm clouds boiling low, dust whipping off the fields. I knew before I saw it that it was waiting. The headlights caught it bouncing out from the right, steady as always, and it rolled ahead of me. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. The speedometer climbed to 60, then 70, then 80, and the tire never faltered. It matched every move, bounding smooth, never wobbling. Then it slowed, just a hair, enough to draw me closer. Against every sane thought, I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, and I realized it wasn't just rubber. The tire was hollow all the way through, and inside, in that black circle, something leaned forward like a man peering through a window. The grin widened as I drew close. My lights flickered, the dash cut out, and then the tire tipped over, flat on its side, in the middle of the road. I swerved to avoid it, and in the split second before my truck hit the ditch, the last thing I saw was the face filling the circle, pressed against the glass of my windshield from the inside. I woke hours later, slumped over the wheel, truck stalled, headlights dead. The road was silent, the dust settled. No tire, no tracks, just me, alive somehow. I drove the long way home that night, and I've taken the long way ever since. But sometimes, when I'm driving past the tree line, near Mineral, Wells, I swear I hear it. The hollow thump, the bounce in rhythm with my speed. And I know one day it won't let me pass by again. Out in the piney woods where the loblolly pines lean over the road like tall men whispering to one another, and the fog hangs low enough to catch your bumper in the morning, people will tell you all kinds of stories if you let them. I used to laugh at most of it because laughing is easy when you're on the move, and your life is a string of motels and gas station coffee. I was selling replacement glass for storefronts and ranch trucks that fall, living on the highway that runs from Nacogdoches to San Augustine and down toward Hemphill. The long black ribbon called 21 and then 147 where the lanes narrow and the shoulders turn to pine straw and dirt. My job was to shake hands, take orders, and keep rolling. And the road was a kind of clock that told me where I was each day, by which diner poured refills without asking, and which cashier tucked the tape under the receipt so I could use it later to stick an inspection sticker straight. I knew the road the way a good mechanic knows the sounds of a sick engine, and for a long time I thought that was enough to keep me safe. The first time I heard about the patrol car with no plates was at a place called Catfish Cabin outside Broadus. It was Tuesday because Tuesday meant hush puppies, and I remember that clearly because the cook swore they used duck fat that day. The waitress had the practiced boredom of someone who has heard every story twice. She topped off my tea and told me to steer clear of County Road 332 at dusk. An old boy at the counter, the kind who sawed his chicken fried steak with a pocket knife and called everyone boss, overheard and spun on his stool with lively eyes. He said a patrol car with no plates had been running folks to the shoulder there. An old black and white Crown Vic with a push bar and a light bar that looked like a brick of rubies. Said the driver wore a khaki uniform and a hat and spoke like his throat was full of gravel. Show him your license and he'd hand it right back without looking at the name. Ask him which deputy he was and he'd say, Unit 112, which didn't make sense because the county switched to 4-digit unit numbers years ago. The old boy smiled when I smirked. You go into town, he said, you try to tell dispatch, they'll look at you like you're picking a fight with the wind. Nobody on their roster, son. Nobody matches the description. I didn't tell him I thought. That was a good way to spook tourists into driving slower past the church where the speed limit fell off a cliff. I paid, left cash on the check because the waitress had slipped me an extra hush puppy, and walked out to my company truck. It was a silver half-ton with a cracked dashboard and a sagging headliner I never had time to fix, and the bed was full of glass sheets wrapped like coffins in cardboard. The radio worked only when it wanted, and the air conditioning gave up in long sighs, but the engine was sound. A V8 with a hard idle, a beast that liked to move. I buckled in, checked my mirrors out of habit, and pulled onto the road with the sense that the trees were taller than they'd been when I went inside. That night I finished up late in a town with one blinking yellow light, where the hardware store and the pharmacy were the same building, and the clerk had to walk the key across the alley to open the storage room. The sun had checked out. The air smelled like damp bark and the kind of cold that starts in October. I turned the truck toward the motel I was using in Lufkin and took 147 because I knew it, and because the old boy's eyes had dared me. Somewhere between mile markers, I turned down a county road I didn't recognize and told myself I was saving time. The asphalt narrowed, and then the white edge lines vanished and the pines walked in close and the stars threw their cold needles through the branches like somebody shaking a colander. The world went quiet in that heavy way the woods know how, to be quiet, with your ears straining to catch what isn't there. I saw the lights a minute after my mind registered the feeling that I wasn't alone. They came up behind me sharp and clean, 2 white diamonds that grew until they were close enough to fingerprint my mirrors. Then the red and blue climbed on top, a hard wash rolling over the trees, and the pines reached for the color like the lights were heat. I pulled to the shoulder that wasn't a shoulder and felt the bank give under the right tires. The truck's seatbelt clicked as if a ghost hand had tugged it. The other vehicle eased in behind me in a perfect arc, and the reflection of the light bar shook in my rearview mirror like a spirit fighting to stand. I set my hands at 10 and 2 and waited, because that is what you do in Texas when a patrol car is behind you. My heartbeat moved down into my wrists. The figure that came up to my window was tall and straight, khaki uniform pressed flat, hat brim low enough to cut off the upper half of his face, flashlight dead in his hand like a prop. He didn't look at my insurance card when I had it ready. He didn't look at the inspection sticker on the windshield that I had adjusted with care using the trick with the receipt tape. He said, "Evening," and his voice had the dry crackle of a radio with the squelch turned wrong. He asked if I knew why he stopped me. I said I did not. He said, "You drifted over the center line a quarter-mile back. License." I gave him my license and watched his hand close on it. His fingers were gloved. I hadn't seen gloves like that since my grandfather's deer camp. I watched him tilt his head like he was reading, but the angle was wrong. He was looking past the card at nothing and nodding. He handed it back. No glance. No name spoken. He told me I was getting a warning and that I should keep it between the lines and keep my speed down when I re-entered the lane. He said, "A lot of folks out tonight," like a line he had said 100 times. He walked back toward the patrol car. When his back moved out of the light from my cab, for a second I felt sure I could see through him to the roadside brush on the other side. The thought ran across my scalp the way a twig drags across a window screen. I waited for the usual stomp back and the little lecture through my passenger side window about safety. Instead, the red and blue snapped off. The 2 white diamonds remained. I shifted into drive and eased back onto the asphalt. In my mirror, the patrol car pivoted with the liquid grace of something underwater and slid away, its headlights shrinking without bounce or shake, as if the road were glass and it had learned to float. I watched until the lights were too cold, nails and then gone. At the motel, the clerk had drawn little pumpkins on the whiteboard under the room rates. I carried my duffel up the stairs and brushed my teeth with water that smelled like a swimming pool. I tried to tell myself I'd been foolish to care. Rural departments had all kinds of budgets and leftover equipment. Maybe the plate bracket had been broken. Maybe the unit number was odd because they borrowed it out of county. Maybe the man in the hat was too tired to say my name and wanted to get through his shift. I lay in bed and listened to the AC unit wheeze and felt sleep come slow. The next morning I stopped by the sheriff's office to drop off a business card, which was a habit of mine in small places. Deputies break windows more than most folks, and need glass quick. The building was a low brick thing with 2 bays out back for their fleet. A female dispatcher with a hair clip the size of a crawfish was at the front, sipping something so sweet the straw stained orange. I waited until a deputy in a brown uniform came in juggling 2 kolaches and a styrofoam coffee and asked if he could use my card. He smiled, said he'd tape it to the corkboard, and asked if I was the guy who had called in a complaint last night about a stop. I told him I hadn't called, but I'd been stopped, and he laughed and nodded like he'd been expecting me. He asked what road. I said I wasn't sure. I described it. He asked about the car. He asked if it had plates. I said no. He asked if I'd seen the unit number on the trunk. I hadn't. He asked what the deputy looked like. I said tall, hat low, voice like a radio. He said, "Unit 112. And there was a flatness in his voice like a board laid across a ditch. I waited for his smile to come back. It didn't. He held his coffee without drinking and looked toward the dispatcher, who looked away. He said there was a thing folks talked about, and that he wasn't supposed to encourage it because it made the radios light up with nonsense calls. He said there'd been a deputy who ran this part of the county back when they still used Crown Vics as if they were the only cars God allowed. He said the man was the kind of cop who wrote with a straight edge and carried more flares than any sane person needs. He said one night the deputy put a car to the shoulder on a straightaway that never should have been dangerous. He said there had been some kind of fight. The deputy called in a stop, and his voice had a lake-smooth calm. Then, there was a noise the dispatcher at the time wrote down as a pop, though every deputy who reads the incident report later knows what it was. Then the radio went quiet. By the time the second unit got there, the cruiser was in the trees. The driver he'd stopped had left with a set of back tires spinning dirt into the black and a smell of gasoline you could taste. By the time they pulled the deputy out, he had a hole where there shouldn't be one. The push bar was bent like a question mark. The plate, they said, was torn away, and nobody ever found it. He told me this as if he were renting the words and needed to return them intact. When he finished, he said 2 people a year walk in and ask why they got stopped by 112. Usually the details match. He asked if I was going to tell him it was a prank. I said I wasn't going to tell him anything because I wasn't sure what I believed. He said good, and laughed without smiling and handed my card back as if he thought he might be giving me a lifeline I should keep in my pocket instead of tacking to a board. I went back to the road because it was my job. The trucks from Henderson down to Lufkin needed new glass. A deer ran through the side of a trailer outside Diebold and sent shards into the break room. A teenager put his elbow through a cafe door in Huntington and cried like a man until I told him to hold pressure and breathe. Life stayed busy enough to keep the part of my head that worried about hats and dead radios mostly quiet. On Thursday, my route took me back past the turnoff for County Road 332, and I pulled over and stared at the sign until a logging truck bawled by and kicked up dust that made my eyes water. I told myself I was only looking. Then I turned down it anyway because some people can't leave a blister alone. It was late afternoon, and the light had the color of iced tea. The road lay still, swampy ditches on both sides, with dark water that showed you the sky with a little shake, like a man trying not to cry. I drove 5 miles and saw nothing but a turtle on the crown of the road. When I stopped to move it, my shadow lay long over the pines, and I felt foolish for talking to it while I carried it. I set it safe on the far side, went back to the truck, and by the time I buckled my belt, the red and blue were already bleeding up the trunks behind me. I pulled over without thinking. The patrol car eased in close, and when the light bar flashed, I could see the shape of the bulbs. Old school, like fat lozenges. The deputy was on me faster this time. No greeting. No question about the center line. He said my inspection sticker was out of date, which it wasn't, and I told him so. And he said inspection went away, but not inspection, and asked if I understood him. I didn't. My mouth said yes. He told me to open my trunk. I explained it was a bed and that the tonneau cover stuck if you didn't push up on the far corner. He walked back there and put his hands on the cover, and then the cover lifted without him touching it. It rolled back and the air got cold. I know that's a cliche, but there it is. He shined his dead flashlight on the glass sheets and leaned in as if he could read them. He touched the cardboard wrapped around the largest piece and left a smudge that spread slow like old oil. He lowered the cover like a man closing a lid on something he'd rather not see again. He came back to my window and said, "Move along." I did, and the longer I drove, the more I wanted to see his face. The hat brim met the lights at the exact place where his eyes should be every time. I let my foot ease up on the gas until I could watch him in my mirror. The patrol car followed me without hurry. I let my truck drop to a crawl. He matched, and the pines turned into a tunnel. I came to a T and signaled right, and he stayed with me. The road came alive with poor patches that thumped under my tires like a heartbeat. He stayed. It occurred to me to call 911 and ask them to tell their deputy to pass me, but pride is heavy and does not move easily. I made the turn onto a road I had never taken, a pecan orchard on one side and a pasture on the other, a rusted barbed wire, fence teaching the wind to sing. He lit me up again. I stopped and rolled my window down and said I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. He didn't answer. He looked at my inspection sticker again, which wasn't there anymore because Texas had changed the rules, something everyone knew. He said, "Your sticker," the way an elementary school teacher points at a missing name on a paper. I said the sticker was gone because the law changed. He tilted his head and said, "Law," and it sounded like a word he had put in a drawer and hadn't opened in a while. His chest moved shallow under the khaki like he didn't need much air. He said, "You were warned." He paused, and that pause felt like a drop into a deeper room. Then he said my full name. He said my middle name too, which is not on my license. He said it plain. He turned his glove, and I saw that the leather was cracked like an old riverbed. He lifted his hand just enough to reveal a ring on his finger, a dull circle that could have been gold once. I drove to town because that's what was left to do. Dispatch listened. The deputy I'd spoken to before came out and asked a series of questions in a tone that felt like grinding corn. He asked what road again and again, as if he could sand down the truth to something smoother if he worked at it. He asked if the car had a plate. I said no again, and he nodded like the word hurt his teeth. He asked if the deputy had said anything besides the basics. I told him the man had said my full name. He looked down at my card in his hand and said that was odd because my card only had my first and last. He didn't finish whatever he was going to say next. The dispatcher looked at me from behind her big clip and asked if I'd mind describing the ring. I did. She took a slow breath and swallowed whatever story she had heard when she was younger or had read in a report she wasn't supposed to browse. She said she sometimes heard Unit 112 key up with a dead carrier, just nothing but open mic for 3 seconds, like someone had sat on a radio in a cruiser that didn't exist anymore. She said sometimes it came through on the old channel they used to use before the repeaters got fixed, the one the antenna on the tower behind the feed store could still catch when lightning hit it. The deputy put his hand on the counter and told her it was enough. I went back to the motel with a head that felt like a box holding a live animal. I took a shower that didn't help. I looked at my license and wondered how he'd known my middle name. I went to my duffel and fished out a manila envelope where I kept old titles and receipts. I had bought my company truck from the glass shop owner during the summer, a paper shuffle that worked out better for his taxes and for my mileage reimbursements, and the title was in my name now. The previous owner before the shop was a city, Fleet in Jasper. Before that, it had been a private owner who left no trace in the thin print but a name and a signature that looked like somebody trying not to get caught. I held the thin stack of paper and felt the need to drive. There's a road east of Zavala that loses its number twice but still gets you where you're going. It runs past a decommissioned way station and a church with a painted sign that says, "You don't find God in here so much as God finds you." I drove that road until I came to a set of concrete pillars that used to belong to a bridge. You could tell because the guardrail ran up to them and then changed its mind. Beyond the pillars, the world fell into a creek bed, and the water made a noise that was bigger than it should have been. In the trees beyond, there was a slash of white. It took me a few seconds to see that it was the roof of a car turned on its side and left to sink into the dirt. Birch bark had skinned off in long strips around it, and somewhere in there a bird thumped once and went quiet. I climbed down the bank because I am an idiot when an idea has me by the nose. The mud tried to keep my boots, and I thought about snakes. The car was a wreck that had been there long enough to grow into the ground. The paint was white, but the dirt had made it tea-colored. The windows were gone. The rear end was snagged in roots. I pushed leaves aside until I found the back panel where the plate should have been. There were holes where the bolts had gone. The bracket was missing. The place where a number should be was a mouth without teeth. I stood there feeling foolish, wet through when the sound came. It started as a faint carrier tone, a subtle whine the way a radio sings to itself when you turn the knob past the place where the resistance changes. Then a voice, low and flat, reading off a meter of numbers, like he was walking a grocery list. 112, it said. 112 out with a white Chevy, Texas plate ending in 947, occupant 1 male, looks business, possible intox no, possible contraband no, code 2, be advised. It came out of the trees. It came out of me too, if I'm honest. Because it felt like my chest was the speaker. The plate ending in 947 matched the old Jasper, Texas plate on my title. I could feel the texture of the paper without touching it. I could see the line where a pencil had pressed too hard and made a ditch in the back of the page. I remembered the signature that looked like someone trying not to be seen. I felt the world tilt one click and settle into a new groove. I got back in my truck with the urgent need to be inside something that felt like mine. The headlights threw a cone along the river of clay that pretended it was a road. When I turned around and rolled back to the highway, my hands were so tight. On the wheel, the little bones at the base of my fingers hurt. The patrol car appeared in the mirror without a process, like I had decided to remember it, and that was enough. Red and blew up, light bar painting the trees. I slowed and stopped and felt the truck's frame shiver as if the lights had mass. The deputy came up to my window and leaned down like a man whose back hurts when he bends. He said, "License," and I gave it and he didn't look at it and he said my full name again and my middle name echoed in the vinyl space of the cab, like a little boy's voice in a gym. I asked what he wanted. The words were nothing special, but speaking them took something out of me because I knew this wasn't a real question and because my mouth was dry. The deputy put his hand on the door, and it sounded like a hand on a hollow drum. He said, "Follow." And he turned and walked back and got in his car, and the car pulled away slow and sure, and there was nothing to do but follow because my foot pressed the pedal without asking me first. He led me down a road I didn't know, and over a cattle guard that sang a thin steel song and past a corrugated building that had been a feed mill once. He took me to a place with a low chain-link fence and a streetlight that hummed. The sign said County Substation, the letters gone pale and peeling in stripes, and the lot held 2 cars that might have run if you whispered a prayer and one that would not. He parked at the edge of the light and sat there. I parked in the halo. The crickets worked the dark and saw nothing wrong with any of it. When I stepped out, he did the same. We stood a few feet apart, and I took a step forward and saw that his badge, which had looked dull before, now had a hairline crack through the middle of it, a split so fine it took the light to show it. The badge number was worn, but I could make out the same digits from the incident report the deputy had hinted around, plain as if I had read it myself. 112. The man's face was a study in almosts. Cheekbones the way men had cheekbones before they learned about acai bowls. Mouth set in a way that said the world should behave itself. Above that, where the eyes should be, dark. Not empty, not holes, but dark, as if the shadow of the brim was a weight you couldn't push aside. He said again, "Follow," and motioned with one hand toward the door of the substation. Inside it smelled like dust and old coffee and paper that has learned to hold on to the oil of hands. A bulletin board held notices for a training that had passed and a funeral that had come and gone. An American flag in the corner raised its edge in the draft like a cat lifting a paw. He walked me past a desk stacked with blank offense reports and a radio that was turned off but singing faintly anyway. At the back there was a room with a metal table and a corkboard with pictures the sun had washed. He pointed at the table, and I looked at the envelope sitting there. It was one of those old triplicate ticket books, the kind with carbon paper that gives you a copy whether you want it or not. The top sheet was thin and crisp and yellowed at the corners. I could see the impression of writing on the second sheet before I picked it up. The top line had my name. The next line had a plate number. Not my current plate. The old one from Jasper, the one with the 947 ending. The date was 2 decades behind us. The violation field read, "Unsafe lane change." And under that a line someone had started and abandoned, the pencil mark trailing into a pilgrim's trail of graphite. I didn't want to touch it, but I did. My fingers came away with the smell of graphite and something else like hot metal that has cooled in the rain. "Sign," he said. The word was so flat and cold it made a little fog in the room even though my breath didn't. I said I couldn't. I said I wasn't the man he had. Stopped. He said "sign," again, and the radio in the other room cleared its throat and said 112 and then nothing else. I looked at the ticket and felt the urge to take a pen and end this, to sign and hand it back and let the world snap back to its proper shape. I reached into my pocket for the pen I always carried. It clicked in my fingers like a small gun. Signed, and as I did, the table moved under my arm. A tremor like a car door slamming somewhere far away in the night. The room tilted a degree and straightened. The ticket took the ink like a thirsty thing. I put the pen down and looked up. The deputy was looking at the door. He said, "Trunk," and lifted his chin toward the parking lot. He led me out without touching me or the air around me and showed me the back of my truck with a tilt of his hat. He said, "Open," and it did, with that same breeze of wrongness without my hands. I expected him to search. Instead, he stood with his hands at his sides and just looked. I looked too, and found myself staring at the cardboard around the largest pane. There, under the edge of the tape, 2 letters in black marker, the kind of letters a kid writes when he's learning to make them straight just to prove he can. J and E. I thought of a name. I thought of the sound a woman makes when she says it the first time, proud and tired. I thought of the incident report. I thought of the line that would have come after the one that said, "A deputy died on a straightaway. That should have been safe." I thought of the way the old boy at the counter had said a lot of folks out tonight. I thought of the trunk of the car the deputy had stopped, the one with the driver who had gone away fast. What could have been in that trunk? What someone might have stashed if he was moving fast and had a conscience that came and went. My breath shuddered in my throat without my permission. The deputy said, "You took it," not like an accusation, but like a man stating the weather. He reached for the cardboard and didn't touch it. The air cooled again with that sharp bite of a meat locker. He said, "You'll take it back." He put his glove to the edge and tapped once, a little knock, like a secret between friends, and the sound traveled through the glass into the bed rails and up into my teeth. He took a step back and the light bar visible over the roof of his car flashed once without sound and died, as if the car had laughed. He left. He didn't walk away or get into his car in any ordinary way. He left in the sense that something stops being and does not announce its departure. 1 second there was a man tall and flat as a door with a hat that kept its own night, and the next there was the shape of a parking lot under a streetlight with moths circling in slow miles. The patrol car's headlight reflections went out, of my mirror-like thought. The radio inside the substation coughed once and cleared, and then there was nothing but the crickets and the far sound of a truck with a bad muffler on a highway I couldn't see. I stood there until a moth found my face and made me swat. I took the ticket and folded it and put it in my wallet, where you put things you can't throw away and can't show anyone. I put the tonneau cover down, and it sealed without complaint. I drove back to the motel slow, as if speed would shake the pieces of me loose, and when I reached my room, I put the glass order on hold and called a number I had not dialed in 15 years. My father picked up on the second ring, his voice the same, too loud because he didn't believe in good reception. He had been a volunteer fireman when I was a kid and had a way of going quiet around wrecks like he was listening for something. That wasn't the sirens. He listened while I told him an edited version that still felt like a lie with pieces of truth shaved over it. When I finished, he said one thing. He said, "If a man asks you to return what isn't yours, and he asks you from the wrong side of the dirt, you don't make him ask twice." I didn't sleep. I drove at first light to a place I had not been since high school, a parking lot carved out of the trees behind a founder's cemetery, where stones leaned as if the names on them were heavy. I took a crowbar from under my seat and opened the bed and dragged the big pane of glass to the lip of the tailgate. With a care I usually saved for pains that were already paid for, I cut the tape and peeled back the cardboard until the letters J and E sat plain in the world. Inside the layers between the cardboard and the protective wrap, there was something thin and flat. A photograph, printed on cheap paper, the kind you make on a grocery store machine. A girl with a gap-toothed smile holding a dog whose ears were too big for its head. The girl wore a shirt with a faded cartoon fish and the letters Jess painted by a hand not so steady. I could feel the moment when the letters on the cardboard and the letters on the shirt collapsed into a single idea and then snapped open again. I felt sick. There were 2 more photographs. In one, the girl stood at a school door waving with her whole body. In the last one, she held a sign with a grade level painted on it, and the corners of the sign were smudged where someone's fingers had held it too tight. The dates on the backs were filled in with a felt tip pen. The latest one was the year the deputy had died. Someone had slid these into the packing to keep them safe in a hurry, maybe to carry them to a car in a trunk that held other things, maybe to hide them, maybe to make it look like nothing valuable was left. I looked at the photographs for a long time. Then I put them in a clean envelope and drove. I didn't know where I was going until the trees parted and the world opened onto a stretch of highway, with a county office that had a flag at half. I parked and walked inside with the envelope in my hand like it was a snake I didn't want to wake. The clerk behind the glass had nails painted with tiny pumpkins and laughed when I flinched as she dropped the metal drawer for me to slide the envelope through. I told her I had found some photos that might belong to a family whose name I did not know, and before I could lie my way through the rest, she looked at the first photo and put her hand over her mouth. She was quiet for a long time, then said a name I won't repeat. She called a woman in the back who came out and took the envelope with both hands like it was a baby. The woman's eyes said that the world could be kind in crooked ways sometimes. She asked me where I got them. I told her. She said she had a cousin who still cried when they played taps, and I knew which funeral she meant without her telling me. She said the pictures were supposed to have been in a trunk that was never recovered. She said a kid had taken them for school and they were gone when she came home. I left the county office feeling like I had borrowed a coat and found money in the pocket. On the way down the steps, I heard a car horn that was not a horn I had heard in years. It was an old siren's two-note test song, that doo-dah sound you get when you tap a switch without flipping it. I looked up and saw nothing. I put my keys in my hand the way a city kid is taught, and found myself laughing at that, because nothing on this road was going to be moved by keys between your fingers. The patrol car did not stop me for a while after that. I told myself the thing was finished. I told myself stories about how a man can get stuck on a job he took too seriously and how it can take just the right small thing to free him. I drove on routes that kept me close to light and the kind of noise I could explain to myself. I made money, I felt better. Then the mail came. The envelope had my name, hand-lettered, middle name included, in a script so tidy it looked like it had been written by a ruler. Inside, folded in thirds, was a copy of a ticket on thin paper, with a carbon ghost below it. Unsafe, lane change. Date the year the deputy died. The plate was the old one again. The signature at the bottom was mine in my own hand, the same little hitch I have when I sign because my 4th grade teacher smacked my wrist for not closing the loop on my E. Paperclip on the top strip was one of those fat black ones you buy by the box for offices. There was a faint smell, not dust, not graphite, something like the inside of a blown fuse. I pressed the paper to the table and felt the impression left by the pen that had signed it, and it was as real as the grain in the wood under my forearms. I put the ticket in my wallet. I still have it. Sometimes I take it out and look at it and tell myself it's proof that I am not alone in being a fool. Other times I think it is proof that the world is ever so slightly to one side of the place. We think it is. Once late, I took a pencil and lightly rubbed it over the blank space under the offense line to see if anything was impressed there on the second sheet. The letters that rose were a child's name, cut off halfway, and the start of the word, return. I still drive that road. The pines lean in. The fog comes down and makes the beams of my headlights look like solid things. There are nights when a set of white diamonds grows in the mirror and sits on my bumper with the patience of water, wearing down a stone. There are nights when red and blue climb the trees and turn the needles into stained glass. There are nights when I pull over and put my hands at 10 and 2 and wait and say yes sir and no sir, and find myself using a tone that a younger me would have mocked. Sometimes he doesn't come to the window. Sometimes he sits back there with his shadow in the brim and waits too, both of us listening to the insects work and to some radio I can't hear adjusting its squelch for a call that will never exactly come. When he does come, he sometimes says nothing. Once he put his hand on the bed of my truck and tapped twice and then put his hand on the door, and the sound he made with his knuckles was the same as the sound a pencil makes when it taps a desk in a classroom when the teacher won't call your name. It has been years since I dropped off the envelope at the county office, and once in a while I will read the community page of the small paper for that area. I never see the story I want to see. I never see a line that says a thing that needed to be found was found. I never see a note that says a man who died was put at peace because the world gave back what it borrowed from him. Instead, I see the pageantry of towns getting on with it. Pancake suppers, youth baseball sign-ups, a picture of a deputy helping a kid try on a helmet. The caption never says Unit 112 because that wouldn't make sense to anyone who hadn't been in those woods with the windows down and the radio off. Once, at a diner in a different county, a man at the counter told a story about a patrol car with no plates and a deputy whose eyes didn't reflect light. He said when he went into town and asked about it, they told him no deputy matched the description, and he had laughed at them because he had a ticket in his wallet that said otherwise. He slapped the leather on the counter twice to show where the ticket lived, and his hand made the sound of knuckles on a hollow table. I didn't say anything. I paid my bill and left cash for the waitress, and when I walked out into the heat, the cicadas threw their metal blanket over the parking lot. I stood there and watched the highway and waited for the urge to run to settle down. If you want a moral, I don't have a clean one. There are men who take their work so seriously it follows them past the places you would think it could go. There are drivers who think their speed and their windows and their modern sense of the law will keep the old world at bay. Both are wrong in their own ways. What I can tell you is this: if you're moving through the piney woods after dark and the pines lean over and your radio goes to static without tuning there, and if the road seems too narrow and the white lines too far apart, and a pair of headlights finds you and rides. Your tail without hurry. Do what you were taught. Keep your hands where they can be seen. Answer the questions even when they are the wrong questions. If a man in khaki tells you to return what you did not know you had, find a way to do it. Even if the only thing you can return is an idea that your life belongs only to you. And if you go into town in the morning to ask about it, and the woman at the dispatch desk looks at you like she is hearing two different songs at once, be kind. She has her own strange stories to carry, and her radio hears more than yours ever will. At times on an empty stretch when I pass a certain straightaway, a shape appears up ahead in the shimmer and resolves into the rear of a black and white with its plate bracket bare and its paint dull from a sun that no longer warms it. It moves, at the exact speed I do, and when I blink it sometimes isn't there, and when I blink again it is. On those nights I can feel the weight of the ticket in my wallet like a coin you cannot spend. I can smell the faint metallic tang of blown fuses, impossible to place. The pines drag their fingers along the roof of the cab. I drive steady. I keep it between the lines. And somewhere not far, a voice made of dust and duty keys, a mic that may not exist, and reports a stop that does, and the county carries us both forward. A man who will someday die and a man who already did and still found enough road to finish one last thing. The first time I saw her was at the light by the Dairy Queen in Bandera, the kind of light that seems to burn longer for out-of-towners. It was after 11, and August heat still clung to the windshield even with the AC on high. I just left a roof inspection in Kerrville, my tablet full of photos of hail dimples and cracked shingles. The plan was simple. Cut down 173, pick up 470 at Tarpley, follow the curves through Seco Creek Country, swing past Hondo, and sleep at the cheap motel by the feed store because they didn't ask questions and the ice machine made cubes that tasted like nothing. That stretch of hill country at night is a braid of cedar smell, desolate FM roads, and radios that lose big city stations and pick up soft AM voices listing cattle auctions and weather warnings no one hears in time. I was alone in the car. That was certain. I remember tossing the hard hat onto the passenger floorboard and sliding the sample shingle into the back seat against my cracked toolkit. The Camry was a dealer trade from San Antonio, dull charcoal with the clear coat fading on the hood. The rear view was tilted just how I like it, a shallow angle that shows the empty back seat and a sliver of rear glass. The world behind framed like a small TV always tuned to potential trouble. The light went green. I eased through and checked the mirror like I always do. And there she was. Not a reflection of somebody behind me, not a trick of streetlights. A woman in my back seat. She sat directly behind me, and a little toward the middle, like someone trying hard not to crowd a driver. Her pale hands folded at the wrist, fingers laced as if waiting for church to begin. She was young at a glance, but not a teenager, maybe 30. Dark hair parted near the middle fell straight to her shoulders. She wore something light in color, a blouse or a dress I only understood as Sunday normal. There was nothing dramatic about her except that she existed where no one should, and she was smiling. Not a toothy grin, not a leer, just a small, contained smile like you give a stranger who has offered you a seat on a crowded bus. I hit the brake out of instinct. A quick stab meant more to test reality than to slow the car. The Camry shuddered. A horn sounded from somewhere behind. I came to a full stop, though the intersection was already mine. She vanished, not faded, gone as if someone had unplugged the TV. The rear seat was nothing but cloth and my old toolkit. I started forward again, heart pitching. The AC rattled. The radio was playing a San Antonio station with morning show idiots rerun late at night to fill the hours. I put the car into motion, felt the smooth pull of the engine, glanced up, and she was back. The same seat, same folded hands, the same careful, polite smile. I didn't turn around because I didn't need to. I could feel it in my bones that if I turned I would see nothing. The empty space my mind knew it should see, and somehow that felt worse than the mirror truth. So I kept my eyes forward and watched her in that small glass rectangle, and her small smile watched me. And Bandera's shop fronts with their hanging tin stars slid past like a painted set. I caught the next red at Main and Cedar. Full stop. She was gone again. When the light changed and I rolled through, she reappeared with the same calm certainty as the return of a needle to zero. Movement brought her. Stopping took her away. I should have turned into the sheriff's lot. I should have gone back to Careville and handed the car keys to the first deputy with a clean shirt. I should have parked and walked under that hot hill country sky until the sun came up and explained myself to anyone with a badge and skepticism. I did not do any of those things. I kept going because my body was already doing it, and because none of what I was seeing made sense in a way that allowed me to be brave in the useful direction, and because, shamefully, something about her calmness worked on me like a sedative. If she had been frantic, wet with blood, stuck in some timeless scream, maybe I would have found a version of me that did the sensible thing. But she sat with her hands folded and smiled like it was me who needed reassurance, and the night drew around the Camry, and the cedar smell thickened, and I kept driving because that is what I know how to do best. The FM road took the city out of my mirrors. The dark came up close. Mesquite leaned inward. Caliche dust stirred when my tires touched the shoulder on curves and fell away again. Tarpley was asleep. At the four-way stop by the little store, I braked to a full, quiet standstill and took a breath that felt like I had been diving too deep. She was gone at once. I could feel the absence like a drop in barometric pressure. The post office flag hung limp. A moth battered itself against a buzzing light. I held the brake longer than I had to. The engine ticked against its mounts. I counted to 5 and then lifted my foot and crept forward. The minute the wheels turned, she was back in the mirror and the smile resumed as if nothing had happened and I had not just tested the world. I spoke without thinking. "Who are you?" Her eyes in the mirror held steady on mine. The smile did not change. I tried a joke. "If you wanted a ride, you could have asked." No change. I turned the radio down. The only sounds were tire hiss and the occasional rattle where the headliner had come loose above the rear window. Across the next cattle guard, the suspension boomed and the mirror shook. For an instant, the smile blurred into teeth and lips and then settled again. My mind ran through every mechanical explanation I could invent. Faces remembered from billboards, a trick of light from some reflective tape in the back seat, the faint overlay of a passenger seat occupant remembered from a different night. But the toolkit in the back had shifted and the metal pry bar lay angled like a shin bone. The fabric was stained with roofing tar. A plastic water bottle rolled, struck the base of the seat, and came to rest. None of it made her. And when I turned my head very slightly and looked over the top of the driver's seat, the back seat was predictably empty, which did not erase her because the mirror held her just the same. I could choose what to see but not what was true. Beyond Tarpley, the road dips and climbs where Seco Creek cuts the land. Low water crossings keep their own counsel down there. In flood season, you learn to respect the yellow gauges with their ladder of numbers, how quickly a trickle becomes a wall. Tonight, the creek beds were ghosts of themselves, dark cuts in the limestone full of crickets and lingering water smell. Signs warned, "Turn around, don't drown," and I always do because I want to live. I toot the horn sometimes in daylight to hear it bounce off the rock walls like a kid testing his voice at a canyon. She shifted, I think. Not the seat, not a rustle of fabric, but an almost imperceptible narrowing of the smile, which I took for attention. I told myself she was not moving. I told myself the mirror angle had changed a hair. I told myself nothing beyond the glass was happening to me. Then, as I came down toward one of the crossings east of Utopia, a gust of wind shoved a hay smell into the car, and the radio dissolved into a wash of static, cleared, and then I heard the emergency beep that means a weather service warning is crawling across a screen nowhere near you. The voice that followed was tinny, a computer trying to sound helpful. Flash flood watch, Edwards Plateau, Uvalde County. Some hour I wouldn't be awake for. I bled speed before the concrete dip. The gauge ruled the night like a skinny prophet, dry. A trickle reflecting headlights. As soon as the wheels almost stopped, she vanished, and a little jolt of fear like cold water hit me. I did not want her gone. That part surprised me, and I did not examine why it might be true. I let the car roll. Her face returned so quickly it was like a film jump. She was closer to the mirror now, and I could see an old, faint white line tracing from under her left ear toward the jaw. Not a scar you would notice unless you were driving through the night with a ghost for a passenger. A hand-stitched repair. "Are you trying to get somewhere?" I asked. "Do you want me to take you?" The smile held, but the eyes softened, in a way I might have imagined. Something gathered behind us. Not headlights. Something like pressure. It braided with the warm smell of dust and something else I could not name. I told myself to make a plan. Hondo was 26 miles the way. I was going if I stayed on it. At the Exxon on 173 there are cameras over the pumps. If I pulled in and stopped, she would be gone. But maybe the cameras would show something before I braked. I could ask the clerk to rewind. I could pretend I lost a wallet and needed to check my car. I could put shape to the shapeless. I did not. Make it to Hondo first. The night had another turn for me. 3 miles past a ranch entrance marked with welded horseshoes, the mirror went darker than it should. It was a darkness not of absence but of density, like fog made of something thicker. I checked the speedometer and eased off. The road ahead was clear, but behind, the mirror was now showing me almost nothing. The woman's smile was a small, bright thing in that thick dark, and as I watched it edge toward the right side of the glass by a hair, the old part of my mind that keeps people alive when there's no time for math understood it as pointing. She wanted me to look to my right, which is the creek side on that stretch. I let the Camry drift right until the shoulder gravel hushed under the tires. I lifted my foot until we were rolling at 10. The smile brightened. I cut the wheel gently to follow the arc of the road as it fell toward a deeper crossing. That little act of obedience did something to my stomach. It was like feeding a stray that you're afraid will come back every night. The crossing was dry at the top, damp at the lower lip. I saw it too late, down in the dark cut, at the edge of a deeper pool trapped by limestone. There was a shape that didn't belong. At first it read as nothing more than a softer patch of shadow. Then my eyes sorted the geometry and I saw the long slope of a rear windshield under a film of water, the faint doubled blink of a hazard light still working somewhere. I let the car roll to the very lip of the crossing and craned my neck, keeping the wheels moving inches at a time. I could hear my own breath. A bullfrog gave one rude note and shut up. In the mirror, the woman's smile widened in a way I did not enjoy, as if I were finally catching up to something which for her had never felt urgent. I put the Camry in park without thinking, and the instant the lever clicked, she vanished and I felt truly alone in a way I had not felt since the first time I woke in an empty house after my divorce. The absence hit like altitude. The hazard, light down in the cut, blinked its patient red and I realized I could hear a sound that did not belong to water or insects. A muffled, rhythmic thump, followed by a pause, followed by another. Someone was alive in that car. I went down the slick concrete on my butt because I have busted my tailbone before, and I do not recommend trying to impress the night. The water came up cold around my knees where the creek made itself new every storm. The car was nose down into the pool, rear up, trunk lip out of the water. A white Corolla with a paper plate from a lot in Sabinal. The driver's window was closed. The back window was half down and water lapped at the edge like a dog. The thumping came from inside the trunk. My stomach made a small ugly flip. "Hey," I yelled. "You in there, hang on. I'm going to get help. Knock again if you can hear me." 3 slow knocks, then nothing. Whoever it was had saved power, or was losing it. I ran up the concrete, feet slapping, and dialed 911 with slippery hands. The call went to Uvalde County. The operator's voice was young, but sounded like she'd seen more than me. I gave her my mile marker guess and the name of the crossing. She asked me to repeat it and then to spell it, and then she put me on hold for a second that lasted 5 minutes and came back with a calm that felt like a blanket. Deputies were rolling from Concan and a volunteer truck out of Utopia was on the way. She told me to stay out of the water if I could, to watch the car in case it shifted, and to keep my eyes on upstream because sometimes the water fools you. I told her I understood and didn't mention the woman I had lost by stopping. Because in that moment, the thumping trunk and the steady voice owned the world. I ran back down and tried the rear door. It wouldn't budge. I braced a foot on the bumper and got my fingers under the trunk lip and pulled like I was trying to move earth. Something inside me stepped forward, the part of me that knows the weight of a ladder and the give of warped wood. The trunk groaned. The lock gave a hiccup. The lid jumped an inch. A slick hand shot up. It was smaller than mine and cold and gravel-scraped. I grabbed it and the metal, heaved my back into it, and the trunk lid went up to my chest and then slammed back down. We tried again. The two of us found a rhythm I will hear in my sleep when I am old. On the third try, I shoved my pry bar in there, the same one I used to nudge decking straight for a photo, and levered. And something in the latch snapped with a neat little metallic sound, and the trunk yawed open. A girl unfolded out of that black like a moth, 16, 17 at most, mud up to her waist, hair stuck to her face in long wet ropes. Her eyes were the pale kind that red as gray in some light and blue in others. She coughed so hard I thought she'd turn herself inside out. Then she clung to me and we climbed and slid and clawed our way up onto the concrete like new seals on a bad beach. The car creaked down there, and I had a sudden picture of it going if I had been 15 minutes later. "Where's your driver?" I asked when she could do more than cough. She made a sound that had words in it. "Gone. He told me to get in the trunk, said it would be safer if it rolled. Then the water tipped it and it stuck. He ran up the road to get a signal. The car moved. I couldn't breathe right and it smelled like gasoline. "You're safe," I said and hoped I wasn't lying. I put my shirt around her because the night was warm, but shock is a thief. And then the first red and blue wash of a deputy's Tahoe reached us, and the crossing became a stage for professionals. The volunteer firemen were all shoulders and quiet, competence. They shut down the road with sawhorses no one would see coming fast enough. A deputy asked me questions with a pen already uncapped. The girl's name was Beth. She kept hold of my wrist until the EMT brushed my hand aside to check her pulse. She asked me where the lady went, and I didn't know which lady she meant until she said, "The one who waved you down." I didn't see anyone wave, I told her. "Back there," she said and thumbed at the road behind me. I saw a woman walking along the ridgeline while I was beating on the metal. I thought she'd keep going, but she turned her head like she heard my knocks, and then she looked at me and smiled, and then she walked into the road without touching anything, and your car came around the bend like she'd been waiting for it. The deputy wrote that down carefully and then scratched it out. He wrote it again and then put a small question mark next to it. Before they put Beth in the ambulance, she reached into the small zip pocket of her soaked hoodie and pulled something out and handed it to me like a tip. "She dropped this," she said. When she waved, it was a plastic hair comb, translucent, pale blue, with one tooth missing near the end, and a little line of molded daisies along the spine. It didn't match the night at all. I took it without thinking. When the ambulance pulled away, I found myself on the shoulder with the comb cold in my palm, and my car idling where I had left it. Door open, dome light on, the rearview mirror, a small rectangle of night that looked unremarkable. I put the Camry in gear. The woman was back the instant the tires rolled. It happened so quickly I made a sound out loud, an involuntary, almost embarrassed, "Oh." She sat with her hands folded, as before, but her eyes did not look at me. They were on the comb in my hand like a polite person acknowledging a returned item. I held it up a little as if to say, "I know this is yours," and her smile widened in a way that made my mouth go dry. I put the comb on the passenger seat because I could not put it anywhere else. At Hondo, I pulled into the Exxon. I wanted the cameras. I wanted a clerk to watch the screen with me and say, "Sir, you have a woman in your back seat." And then I wanted 15 people with phone cameras to come over and film it, so the world could confirm what had happened. I braked hard and she was gone. I sat there with the car in park and the fluorescent light sizzling overhead and didn't move for a long minute. I got out and went into the store and bought coffee from a pot that looked like it had been started. At noon, a trucker with oil field logos on his hat offered me a nod only given to men awake in the wrong hours. When I asked the clerk if I could look at the security feed because I thought someone had been in my car, he showed me a screen full of squares. We rewound and played the last 3 minutes. My Camry slid in and halted. The driver's door opened. No one else was visible. The clerk shrugged and said, People get the feeling at night. Sometimes I feel like I've been standing next to somebody all shift and there ain't nobody there. Want a fresh pot on? I said I did. I took the coffee to the car and sat there with it cooling and the comb whittling a flat spot on the seat. When I put the car into reverse, the woman appeared in the mirror as if she had been there the whole time and had simply been playing by a rule. Only while moving. Disappears when stopped. You could build a life around a rule if you wanted to. It didn't end there. I wish it had. I wish I could say I handed the comb to a deputy, said something rational, and drove home under a sky that meant nothing more than weather. But once you are shown a door where a wall used to be, you keep opening. That's our curse. We choose to know the second thing. 2 nights later, after a day of looking at roofs and telling people gently that this shingle was wear, not storm, and what they imagined would be covered was going to sit where it sat until time or money moved it, I drove back toward the same low-water world because I could not drive it. The evening news I had not been watching had another story before I left my room. A teacher from Hondo missing 2 months, last seen at a gas station on 90, believed to be traveling in a blue Civic with a man who had a record for smaller ugliness. No one said her name like they believed it would become a memorial. They said it like they feared it would. I didn't tell the woman in the mirror where I was going. She knew. She appeared as soon as we left the parking lot and the door chime died. Her hands folded, her smile small. We took 173 south and then cut west. I told myself I kept my eyes on the road, but of course I was splitting everything into mirror and not mirror. Whenever I eased off, she vanished. Whenever I rolled, she returned. I tested it with slow crawls, with coasts, with the kind of near stops you make at 2 in the morning when you can hear your own mental lawyer telling you to do better. The rule was absolute. She would not be seen unless we were going somewhere. She led me by not leading. The mirror darkened when I drifted wrong. It lightened when I chose the right fork. Once, past a cattle guard that squealed like it had a voice, I felt the car tug toward a ranch road I had never taken. And when I did, the smile grew a measurable degree brighter. There is a horror in being praised for obedience. You start looking for it. You become the kind of man who waits for the light in the rear view when you could be deciding for yourself. This road fell toward a different cut. Not Seco this time. Another drainage with a bed like bleached bone. Down there, a sedan had been pushed under by spring flood and forgotten by summer heat. What remained was a hull with an engine still wearing a belt, a frame with a history of dents and one passenger door that had rusted closed in a pout. In the gravel near it lay a rosary, the kind you see hanging from mirrors, the cheap beads gone a strange chalky color from sun and time. I don't know why I saw it. It was not in my path. I cut the wheel without thinking to keep the car moving so I would not lose her, opened my door with the car creeping, and grabbed the rosary like a thief. The movement cost me skin off my knuckles and a skid mark on my dignity. I rolled the rosary into my palm, got back in the seat and set the string by the comb. The woman's smile grew again, and it was the first time it felt like something other than a comfort. It felt like an agreement ratified. I found 3 such things over 2 weeks. A child's plastic barrette in a bar ditch 20 miles from anywhere. A cheap ring with stones that looked like diamonds and probably weren't, left in the gravel of a fence cut where kids go to drink and swear. A folded photo in a zip bag under a rock at the edge of a picnic area no one used since the county stopped mowing it. In the photo, a woman not mine smiled in front of a red sign that read, Nesh's River, with a little sprig of hair stuck to the tape. Each time the mirror went from normal night to airless dark if I veered wrong and to a strange soft brightness when I went right. Each time she watched. Each time, the smile deepened by a degree I could feel like heat against my cheek. I did not give any of these things to the sheriff because I could not explain why I had them. I put them in the glove box like a misbehaving teenager. On the day the Hondo teacher's story ended the way these stories often end, with a body found in a dry creek bed miles from where anyone last spoke her name for anything but news, I sat in the Camry in a church parking lot and did not go inside. The sun was white and mean. The heat was all the way into the tires. My phone told me her name again, and the man's mugshot floated past my eyes until it was more real than the sky. I placed the comb, the rosary, the barrette, the ring, the photo in their neat failure, one on top of the other, and watched the woman in the rear view watch me. Her smile had reached the point where it showed small teeth. There was a smudge of something on her cheek I had not seen the first night, like creek mud dried and not yet wiped away. I understood then that I was not collecting these things for a case. I was making a place. I drove that night because I did not know what else to do. I meant to go only to the feed store and back, to buy something I did not need as a reason to stand under a fluorescent light and make small talk. Instead, I passed it, and the road began to choose for me. The mirror darkened when I resisted. It lightened when I gave in. Near midnight, I found myself on 337 between Vanderpool and Leakey, the twisted sister with its waist-high walls and sudden precipices. My hands were steady on the wheel because they always are when roads get bad. My whole life I have been better with a job than with an idea, and this road is a job you have to do with intent. The first whitetail jumped from the cedar like a miracle of bad timing. I braked properly, did not swerve, felt the ABS kick its little drummer's heel. The deer launched itself into my future and was gone. The second one waited 30 seconds and did better. By the time I reached the overlook that makes city people gasp in daylight, I was sweating like it was July at noon. She was closer in the mirror than any night so far. I could see the whites all around her irises, a moonlit ring. Her hands were still folded, but the fingers had tightened. The smile had more teeth now. I don't know if I said her name or if I made one up or if I said nothing. The wind up there comes through the gap like a living thing. It shoved at the Camry and made the headliner thrum. The rock wall on my right glowed pale. The drop to my left was everything I own. When the curve opened and the long straight toward Leakey lay dark and welcoming, the rule we had been living by changed. It changed the way a snake does, by shedding something and revealing itself. A pickup rounded the far bend with its fog lights on high and its driver careless in the way men get when the night has been theirs for too long. The beams swung across my windshield as we closed on each other. For an instant, the light found my mirror perfectly, washed the glass in glare, and the woman did not disappear. We were not stopped, and she stayed, yes, but it was more than that. She leaned forward. For the first time in the weeks I had known her, she shifted in a way I could not write off as my eyes lying. Her hands unfolded. One pale hand lifted and hovered above my right shoulder, not touching, waiting, and in the thinnest possible whisper of a moment, I felt the cold of it on my skin, even though there was no contact. The smell that came with it was creek water and old cedar and something iron. The smile continued, and it had changed from reassurance into promise. At the next stop sign in Leakey, I braked as hard as I ever have in a car I wanted to drive again. I put it in park and set the brake and turned the key off, and I sat in that white glow of a little town with its benches and its shuttered ice cream window and waited for the rule to save me. The mirror showed only the empty back seat and the unremarkable rear shelf. I let out a breath that sounded like someone else. I reached over and opened the glove box, and one by one I took the things I had collected and set them on the passenger seat. When I picked up the comb, a strand of hair I had not seen before floated loose. It was too long for me, too dark, and when I held it up, it moved in the breath of the AC like a snake in clear water. I swallowed wrong. My eyes watered. The hair drifted down and lay across the gear shift like a thing that had been planning to for a long time. The light changed. I put the car in drive and eased forward, because how else do you leave a place? The mirror filled with the back window, and I braced for her. Nothing. The road out of town is a ribbon at that hour, and I followed it with my mind in my mouth. 10 miles later, past a herd of black cattle lined up with their backs to the world, the rule ended completely. We were moving. We were alone on a night road. She appeared not in the back seat, not in the mirror, but in the passenger seat beside me, as sudden as breath. Hands folded, turned slightly toward me, her smile entire. The scar at her jaw was chalk white. Her dress was the color of dry cotton, She did not flicker. She did not blink. She turned her head and looked directly at me, not my reflection, and the cold on my shoulder became weight. I did what men do when they are shown that their understanding is a joke the world tells for sad amusement. I kept my hands on the wheel. I maintained a steady speed. I did not look at her again, though she was 6 inches away, and whoever designed my life had placed a curve with no guardrail in front of me like a choice. I drove through the night with my heart doing small, fast throws in my chest, and the perfume of limestone and water and old hair filling the car, and I understood that the rule had never been hers. It had been mine. I had needed the mercy of an if-then world where stopping meant safety. She had not agreed to that. She had only allowed me to think it was true until I collected enough of what she had left along these roads to make a place for her closer. At 2 in the morning, back in Hondo, the traffic lights blinked yellow at empty intersections. I rolled toward the motel on 90 as if it could contain what had followed me there. In the mirror, there was only the square of rear glass because she had no use for that trick anymore. In the glass of the office door, I saw for a blink a double reflection that was not mine. In the vending machine glass, I saw the same. When I turned the key in my room door, the comb fell off the seat into the space between the seats and landed, teeth down, with a soft, uncanny sound. I picked it up and set it on the dresser, and it lay next to the remote like it belonged there. I slept for 3 hours, and in that sleep I dreamed not of water or roads, but of an empty back pew at a church, where everyone knew my name, and a woman with folded hands sitting there smiling just enough to be remembered when the service ended. When I woke, the room smelled like the creek even though the air was dry. The mirror on the wall caught the light and made a long bar of brightness on the bed, and for the first time since Kerrville and the Hale Dimples, I understood that I was not going to be alone in a car again, not the way people mean alone. It has been 3 weeks. We go out every night whether there is a reason or not. I avoid the Twisted Sisters because I intend to keep the car shiny side up at least until the first blue norther scrapes the sky clean. I avoid low water crossings unless the sky is clear enough to show me every star I have not earned. I do not tell anyone because to tell it invites the wrong questions and the wrong fixes. People love a fix. I do not think she wants one. Sometimes at a long light in San Antonio where the river's loops make the wind smell like wet stone, she isn't there until the car begins to roll. And sometimes she makes herself my right hand, the instant I hit the start button, as if it has always been her car. I do not stop for anyone waving on the shoulder, unless the mirror darkens the way it does when a choice matters. I do not pick up combs or beads anymore. The glove box is empty, of everything except napkins and the owner's manual and the registration with my name on it. When I turn my head quickly and look right, the seat is empty. When I look forward and I let my eyes creep up to the rear view, the mirror gives me what it always gives me now, which is myself made small, and the back seat I know is empty, and between those two reliable facts, her, singing a silent song with the curl of her mouth that says, "Go on, go on, go on." And when I do stop because life insists on it, at a red light or a drive-through window or a gate that opens slow as a prayer, the air goes cold for a second near my shoulder and warms again when we roll, which is how I know that the rule lives, not to save me, but to keep us moving until the last stop. The only one she's been smiling toward since Bandera, a stop I will not name because I hope to be late for it, and because there are places she whispers about when the wind is right, places that don't exist until you drive long enough to get there. I do not want a name for those places. I only want to keep my hands where they belong, and my eyes on the road and the mirror adjusted to the small truth it shows.